Chapter 171 The Outcome of the Civil War. Under the night sky, the bloody patches on Giza's face had turned purple. In the ruined city center, she stood with an alluring smile on the slender, pitch-black, hydra studded with sinister black thorns. It resembled a giant long-legged spider from afar. You will never have the opportunity to threaten our hopes again. The air mystic maintained his calm expression, as light as clouds and as gentle as the wind. He watched Giza with indifference. I will dispose of you immediately. Ha ha, the blood mystic laughed delicately, showing a dimple on her face. Dispose of me, how are you going to do that? The air mystic's eyes glimmered and the blue light on his face grew to a dazzling degree. Whoosh, asterisk. A strong turbulence suddenly exploded around Giza's body. It caused the pet beneath her to lose its footing. The airflow continued growing stronger in an attempt to sweep the blood mystic up. The black monster beneath her was blown off the ground, floated in the air. Only a sharp spike remained embedded in the ground. The air mystic slowly said, above the sky lies an unknown land. It is a place even air cannot reach. It is cold, quiet, and flickers with light. There, life almost ceases to exist, even gravity loses its meaning. You will not fall, and yet, you will not fly. You will just meaninglessly revolve in an endless orbit around the sun, moon and constellations. The air mystic's voice was devoid of fluctuations. You should just go there and have a few thousand years of slumber. Once we completely win this war for the survival of mystics, a war that has lasted thousands of years whereby every 1,000 years is counted as a single unit. Once the mystic evolved, his rational, somber voice quivered slight during that instant. You will awaken again to be in the new, prosperous and glorious world we build, one where we will have no enemies, no fear, and no running away. Ellipsis. From the deathly still street came the sound from two sets of flighty footsteps. Thales pulled Little Rascal along as they ran across a street at almost walking speed. Both were panting from exhaustion. They could not help but to stop and rest with their palms on their knees. Have we escaped? Little Rascal's voice trembled. She turned her head, unwilling to look at the people who had fallen dead on either side of the street. We'll find out. Once we're rested, we'll keep walking, but don't stop, Thales said, gritting his teeth in perseverance. Little Rascal bit her lip and shook her head. Year 346 of the calendar of eradication, the Allied forces of the Eastern Peninsula invaded Dragon Cloud City during the Third Peninsular War. From Shield District, Hammer District, and Armor District, to Sword District, Bow District, Arrow District, Spear District. Thales raised his head and glanced at Little Rascal. He saw the little girl shiver as she murmured, besides Axe District and Heroic Spirit Palace still relying on the two final portcullises to fend against external attacks, the entire city was already conquered by the Nightwing King's army. Up until Char erected his black flag in Northland. But even then, the casualties in Dragon Cloud City still did not, and now, Little Rascal's eyes were red-rimmed as she firmly clutched Thales' arm. She did not dare to look at the corpses sprawled all over the streets. Dragon Cloud City, is Dragon Cloud City going to be destroyed? I don't know, Thales sighed with a heavy heart, but we're still alive and that's enough. Thales straightened up. Without further explanation, he pulled Little Rascal up and continued walking. Also, he fixed his eyes firmly on the ground beneath his feet and carefully avoided the corpses that seemed to appear every 2 steps. Also, Dragon Cloud City must possess a way to resist the mystics. Otherwise, Thales raised his head and stared at the street, now enveloped in still silence. He gritted his teeth lightly. This is what mystics are, and this is their power. But Thales lowered his head to look at a child at his right foot. He was about the same age as Thales and held a wooden stick in his hand before he died. Thales felt a wave of misery in his heart. I guess no one can survive this. At this moment, a man's weary voice rang from the ruins northwest of them. If I were you, boy. Thales quivered as Little Rascal screamed in fright. Thales subconsciously took a retreating step. He held Little Rascal firmly behind him while his right hand groped for JC's dagger. Then, he fixed his eyes unwaveringly at the place where the voice came from. How? Thales scowled. He watched in disbelief as a corpse at his 10 o'clock began to budge. Zombies. Thales, who already had experience with this, instantly felt his skin crawl. Little Rascal closed her eyes in fear. The corpse turned over and revealed from under him a hand. With eyes opened wide in shock, Thales stared at the hand that extended from below ground in surprise as it pushed away a pile of gravel and lumber. It then animatedly dug a hole in the snow. A head emerged from inside. Thales felt a chill in his heart. It can't be. Fortunately, it was not as he imagined. If I were you, I would not go there. Under the moonlight, a filthy, bloody man wearing a battered shirt climbed out from the hole. He panted as he laid down sideways. Asda's trick did not do a good job at clearing the place. There are still some things moving up ahead. By the moonlight, Thales saw the man's face clearly. He could not help but tremble as he stared intently at him. My God, he's Black Sword. The words escaped Thales' mouth as he spoke in amazement. You aren't dead. Little rascal had her eyes wide open as she looked curiously at the dying man among the ruins. Pulled a trick, not dead for the time being. Black Sword laid on his back on the ground and put on a weak and ugly smile on his average-looking face. He patted his left bicep, which had layers upon layers of thick, white cloth wrapped tightly around it, but there was a terrifying bloodstain on the cloth. I don't die easily. If he was considered disheveled when they were escaping Asda, then the only way to describe Black Sword's current state was miserable, judging by the large and small wounds on him. Thales frowned. Black Sword raised his head with effort and looked at the whole street of corpses. He fell back to the ground and heaved a long sigh. In front, there's a group of those things merging together to become tentacles, and they're still alive. Black Sword gritted his teeth, broke out in cold sweat and trembled uncontrollably. In that instant, he seemed to be suffering from some kind of pain. Thales even felt as if something was changing deep inside his body, and, it is, going crazy. Best that you don't go. Thales squinted his eyes and looked down the straight street. Sure enough, he noticed a frantically twitching blood tentacle. One of those disgusting pets of Giza's. His heart began to worry, is there another way? If not. Just as he pulled Little Rascal up and prepared to see if there was another way out, Black Sword's voice rang from behind once again. Wait a minute, boy. Thales' footsteps stalled. The second prince turned his gaze around and looked at the miserable Black Sword who lay on the floor. Black Sword swiftly exhaled, as if a wave of pain had just passed him. He curled his lips, his eyes sharp. You, who exactly are you? Thales stared at him and frowned. Little Rascal glanced at the prince and bit her lip. Black Sword gradually calmed his breath, laid on the ground and set his eyes on Thales. Asda's trick, the one that sucks all the air out, was really terrible. I'm afraid that all the people in this block have died. I buried myself underground, desperately inhaling the little amount of air among the rocks and soil. Eventually, I escaped and survived it. You really don't die easily. Thales shrugged and left. I'm used to the race against death. Black Sword's deep voice rang from behind him, but it is you, little fella, you shouldn't be alive. Thales clenched his hands. The degree of the attack Asda unleashed is one that does not differentiate friend or foe. He still didn't forget to protect you both, right? Black Sword huffed a hot, white breath. Are you really that important to him? Who exactly are you? Thales was stunned. His heart rate began to accelerate. Thankfully, Black Sword is injured. Hopefully he has no excess energy left to deal with me. But... Thales raised his head. Those two should be dueling at the moment. Thales coldly said, you better escape immediately. If you wait until one of them wins, well, no matter who wins, you'll be in trouble. Black Sword looked at him without a word. His eyes sparkled on his filthy face. His gaze gave Thales chills, as if he knew how Thales had diverted the conversation. Little Rascal timidly pulled at him. You better be more polite, little fella. A disturbing radiance seeped from Black Sword's eyes and he said darkly, I'm now your only chance for survival. Thales was stunned upon hearing this. You should look forward to me recovering quickly so that I can deal with those tentacles, and flee with both of you when those other things chase after us. Thales stared blankly. What? Finally, Black Sword's burning eyes no longer stung. If the both of them start fighting, you are hoping that Asda will come out the winner, correct? You think that at least you're still of exploitable value to him. You think he won't kill you? With a twitch of his eyebrows, Thales turned around and prepared to leave. When Thales took a step forward, Black Sword shifted his body. The movement caused him to grimace in pain. What a pity, the winner will only be that disgusting young lady. Thales finally frowned. He turned towards Black Sword once again. Why? I've fought hand to hand against that young lady once before. Black Sword sighed and smiled bitterly. I survived. That girl has a special perception and control over those with flesh and blood. Perhaps she also has killing moves, just like Asda does. Under Thales' extremely confused stare, Black Sword shook his head and flexed his wounded left arm, but that is not the most terrifying part about her. She might seem crazy, brutal, and unreasonable. Black Sword turned his head, eyes solemn. But in her very bones, this B*TCH really knows how to fight, and how to win. Compared to her, Asda's like a Hercules who has never been in combat, he just has terrifying brute strength. In reality, he can't withstand a single blow. Thales and Little Rascal exchanged a look. They both saw endless puzzlement in each other's eyes. Why do you know this? Thales shook his head. You've never seen them fight, and they can't even kill each other. Killing is one matter, winning is another. Black Sword snorted. Asda and I are old acquaintances. Although I can't kill him, I'm already used to escaping him one time after another. As for that young lady, Black Sword's injuries seemed to taking a turn for the better, so he began exercising his right arm. When Ramon was killed just now, I rushed towards her with the intention to flee and search for a place to recover. Thales sighed. I thought you actually went forward to protect us. You don't need my protection. Black Sword snorted lightly. At that time, Asda would protect you. Thales shrugged and shifted his gaze. In short, I plan to pretend to be injured by her and deceive her with a piece of flesh. Black Sword took a deep breath. Alas, when the first strike was dealt, I realized that I didn't even need to pretend to be injured. Cold sweat broke out on Black Sword's forehead again. At that moment, Thales sensed some strange power surging from his body again. The second time we fought against each other, she already absorbed all the experience gained during our first battle and completely overpowered me. Black Sword gritted his teeth and there was only a fierce glare in his eyes. It's different from when I faced Asda. During the second fight against her, I absolutely had no chance. Her battle instincts and experience is something that seemingly powerful but actually completely harmless air mystic cannot imagine. Thales frowned again. Completely harmless. He remembered the people who were kneaded into balls and scoffed in his heart. That's your appraisal of Asda. Are you using the quality assessment criteria from China? At that moment. Bang, asterisk. Thales turned his head around in shock. Right before his eyes, he saw a blood-red figure suddenly dash towards them from the straight street. Little rascal tightened her grip over him. Ah, it's that thing. Damn it. Black Sword stared at the tentacle slithering madly towards them like snakes. As he shivered, he tried moving his feet and could not help but frown. They lost their roots, but they can still move. In the blink of an eye, the blood-red tentacle had already arrived right before their eyes. Thales stared at the immobile Black Sword laying on the ground and sensed little rascal's grip over his arm. He could not help but feel as if his soul had left his body in fear. Ellipsis. As the two mystics fought against each other, Giza laughed maniacally. New World, ha 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 ha, I suddenly realized that you should be able to get along well with Lebla. Do you want to consider joining the extremists? The air mystic did not reply her. The next moment, the wind grew swiftly stronger. The blood mystic did not drag the fight out any longer. She lowered her body swiftly and touched the gigantic, spider-like, pitch-black monster beneath her. The latter shuddered. More black spikes shot out from its spike-riddled body. In the billowing wind, it sent those spikes piercing straight into the ground. Faint tremors rose from the ground. While watching his opponent attack calmly, Asda could not help the change in his expression. A dazzling blue light shone briefly on his face again. The blood mystic and her pet continued swaying in the wind, but the former was still smiling while she met the air mystic's gaze squarely. A black spike shot out of the ground. Crack. Then, a miniature version of the black monster shot out of the ground with an astonishing speed while covered in spikes as gravel flew all over the place. It charged towards Asda from 3 steps behind him. Bang, asterisk. It knocked into a transparent barrier. There was no change in the air mystic's expression. He had brought up the air wall in the nick of time to block the monster behind his head. And yet, more rustling sounds came, and the cracking of ground resounded around the air mystic. Crack, crack. Dozens of spider-like black monsters covered in spikes swiftly and nimbly broke out from the earth and shot out of the ground. Almost with no blind spots whatsoever, they surrounded Asda and pounced on him. The air mystic clenched his fists lightly. Boundless visible water vapor immediately manifested within 10 meters around him. Those dozens of monsters shuddered simultaneously. However, their shivers only lasted for an instant before they regained their mobility and charged at him. The air mystic raised his eyebrows. Extracting all the air from the area won't work. While within the violent gusts of wind, the blood mystic watched Asda with an air of superiority, as if she was watching something hilarious. They are adorable little cuties that can tenaciously survive in vacuums. Eventually, the air mystic frowned slightly. However, a second later, he unfurled his fists. Bang, asterisk. The sound of countless ruined houses shattering traveled in the air. Air pressure rushed forward in billowing waves to pounce on the circular 10-meter vacuum and forcibly suppress the monsters. During the next moment, layers of ripples appeared on the crack-like blue light on the face of the seemingly extremely calm air mystic. An invisible stream of air erupted outwards with a shocking momentum from Asda acting as the center. Snow and dust flew into the air. Dirt and stone shot out in all directions. A sphere formed by dirt started expanding swiftly from the small center of the circle. Boom, asterisk. The violent stream of air turned into a whirlwind, the natural phenomenon that was the most impossible to defend against, and it blew away and cleared everything in the area. In the ball of rotating air, the air mystic calmly observed everything happening around him. But before the astonishing ball of air could completely erupt, the air mystic suddenly turned his head around and looked towards a spot in the earth. Over there was a small black monster that was dashing towards him without slowing down, as if it had completely ignored the great, rampaging wind. In Asda's eyes, he could only see the monster forcefully lift a spike and point it forward while it swayed in the storm. Once it had placed its other spiked limbs behind it, it kicked its feet repeatedly, and like an octopus in the ocean, it rushed forward in a bizarre fashion. A grim look finally appeared on the air mystic's face, who previously seemed to have lost his emotions. This posture and movement, it's what she used to take care of Black Sword just now on the cliff. More black monsters used those strange actions to maneuver through his terrifying air streams and shot towards the air mystic from all directions. In that instant, Asda curled his left index finger and he shot up with a speed skin to lightning, flying into the air. But it was already too late. A monster pounced into the air and an incredibly long spike shot out of its abdomen. It pierced through Asda's left shoulder blade. Then, it dragged him down. Reacting immediately to the situation, the air mystic snapped his fingers. An invisible ball of air formed, and under high pressure, was condensed into a sharp blade that would erupt upon contact when it cuts through the thin spike at a horizontal angle. However, more monsters would either shoot those spikes out or step on their own kind so that they could obtain an extra boost and pounce on Asda. One monster pounced on his back, another seized his ankle, one of them released a thin spike and had it pierce through his left eye. Another fell on his head, countless others of their kind pounced on him in succession with clear, separate targets. Dozens of black monsters covered the air mystic in the air during that instant and covered the blue light on him tightly. The next moment, their spiky limbs shuddered back and forth like a bowstring that had been released. Rip, shick, splat, asterisk. The sounds of flesh and blood being scrapped off resounded in the air unendingly. During the next moment, as countless monsters cut, ripped, pierced, and bit into him, the airborne Asda was reduced to a million pieces. His fingers, elbows, arms, chest, head, thighs, ankles, the air mystic's torn body fell from the sky and scattered on the ground. The rampaging airstream finally stopped. The blood mystic and her black monster landed on the ground. I mentioned it before, life is great. The blood mystic lifted her index finger in a bewitching manner and tucked a fluttering purple lock from in front of her face to a spot behind her ear, as if she was teaching a naughty kitten a lesson. And then, with a horrifying smile, she said, "These cuties were born with the mission to rely on their lean, compact bodies and their senses in the air, to hunt all their prey down under that nonsensical air pressure and air flow of yours." The blood mystic chuckled. Asda's mangled body turned into glittering spots of blue light before they slowly gathered together to form the glowing outline of a human. "Those movements, those, are the ones Black Sword used when he fought against me," the glowing blue outline said. "You saw our fight against each other and used the lives you created to imitate him." "Oh, about that," Giza's body slowly descended. "That fellow is very powerful. He actually used a useless piece of flesh to deceive me. Since he's so great, it's only natural that he becomes my model for learning. After all, I was once a witch." The blood mystic walked down from the gigantic black monster's back, covered her mouth, and chuckled lightly. "Learning and experimenting was required in my past profession." The maiden gently bent her back while the purplish-red cracks on her face shuddered. She lifted a spider-like black monster that had been, severely injured, by the air torrents just now and was lying next to her feet. Her gaze was so gentle, she looked as if she was caressing a kitten in her neighborhood. However, during the next moment, a fierce look appeared on the blood mystic's expression. The small monster in her hand jumped up and pounced on the air mystic's blue light, which had yet to take complete form. As if they had received an order, countless small black monsters leapt onto that blue light. Some of them exploded consecutively into broken limbs and blood, causing ripples to appear in the blue light that was about to take on a human shape. Mystic energy interference. There was puzzlement in the voice coming from the glowing contour. "You know that will not be effective. At most, it will only delay my resurrection." However, Giza's next answer made him fall silent. "That will be sufficient." Bang, asterisk. A gigantic blood-red tentacle suddenly burst out from the ground under the blue light, divided itself into countless smaller tentacles and gripped the other monsters in the blue light tightly. "Giza, you," the glowing human outline spoke amid the ripples, as if he was slightly surprised. The blood mystic laughed loudly. "Say, how much air do you think exists hundreds of feet, hundreds of meters, or even thousands of meters underground? How much time will you need to return to the surface using that meager supply of air? That amount of time should be enough for me to kill that boy." The glowing silhouette did not speak anymore, but he had obviously sped up his process of gaining a corporeal form, as if he had become extremely anxious. But alas, every single black monster that exploded after they entered the blue light could scatter a portion of the blue light, greatly reducing his speed of recovery. Of course, you can increase the level of your power to strengthen your control and area of effect. The blood mystic sighed, "But I do believe that if you want to immediately return when you are underground, the power that you'll need will require you to knock on the door leading to that power, which is not yet open to you. Only then can you succeed, right?" The glowing silhouette flashed brightly. The blood mystic smiled coquettishly and said, "Now then, are you going to knock on the door to protect the boy, or are you willing to watch the boy die for your own safety?" The frequency of the flashes on the glowing silhouette grew more rapid. "See, this is the tragedy of never going to war." The blood mystic snorted lightly, then stroked her now blood-red hair, which had turned this way due to the evolution of her power just now. "All of you, just a bunch of amateurs who never went through civil war." A few seconds later, the glowing human-shaped outline finally spoke. "I don't understand. This isn't how you do things. That so-called reason of yours is also untenable. Why are you willing to pay such a large price and face the danger of being sealed by anti-mystic equipment, or being discovered by Helen to insist on killing that boy? Just because you don't want him to suffer, as you said." Asda's voice sounded airy and indistinct since he had yet to gain physical form. During that moment, both mystics fell silent for a moment. Eventually, the blood mystic muttered faintly, "You won't understand. No one else besides me will understand." In the next moment, a gigantic blood-red tentacle dragged the black monsters in the blue contour along with the blue light straight down into the bottomless underground. Gravel tumbled down, filling up the pit which had formed when the tentacle broke out of the ground. The tremors lasted for a long time until they became fainter. Eventually, they disappeared. Giza was the only one left, and she watched the spot on the ground where Asda disappeared quietly. Her eyes were filled with a complicated emotion which would provoke much thought. The gigantic black monster crawled forward from behind her. It stretched out its head, or perhaps it was a spiky limb, and affectionately bumped the blood mystic. That's right, the purplish-red spots on Giza's face gradually faded away, and her expression returned to normal. She gently caressed the monster beside her and whispered, "At least I still have you, Kilika." Chapter 172 Elimination. Under the night sky, in the deserted ruins of Shield District. The blood mystic slowly turned around as she caressed the pitch-black Kilika. In the next moment, the dense outer layer of the spider-like Kilika began to tear, deform and swell. Its black appearance reddened as dozens of blood-red tentacles made out of mangled human limbs extended from its body, and even grew larger. Kilika grew increasingly larger until it turned into the blood-red hydra Thales had seen before. It shook its tentacles like a huge squid of about dozens of meters tall and let out a bizarre shriek. Find the child. Giza's madness and obsession just moments ago disappeared along with the purplish-red patches on her face. At that moment, she was quiet and placid, just like a normal, pure girl. The mystic gently caressed Kilika, and her words were plain and gentle. You know his scent, understand his presence, and are familiar with his blood. Giza gently exhaled, wearing an odd expression. That boy's blood, the boy you wish to devour even in your dreams. The hydra and its 10 or more giant tentacles trembled at once. The squishing sounds of flesh and blood scraping and pressing against each other resounded from within them. Boom, asterisk. The tentacles slammed down with a loud rumble, forming dozens of deep gorges in the wreckage. Smoke and dust billowed in the air. Giza smiled. She looked at the terrifying Kilika with a doting expression, as if she was looking her own angry pet dog wagging its tail. Go ahead, find him. Giza, who seemed like the girl next door, paused for a second before opening her lips lightly to exhale. Before he becomes a mystic. Kill him. Even if it means destroying Dragon Cloud City. Even if it means exposing myself. Even if. The strange, disturbing, squishing sound emerged once more from Kilika's enormous body. In the next second, its dozens of blood-red tentacles bore into the ground in every direction. Boom, 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 asterisk. Its flesh seemed to proliferate endlessly as it continued to extend its tentacles and dug into the ground. Suddenly, Giza narrowed her eyes and turned around with a grave expression. A human figure emerged abruptly from within the smog Kilika stirred up. He walked slowly in the mystic's direction. Giza breathed a gentle sigh. As expected, too much time was still wasted. Step by step, the human figure in the smog approached slowly. The blood mystic closed her eyes and shook her head gently. All right, it looks like the people in the surrounding districts have been evacuated. Reikaru's descendants are not completely worthless after all. Right at that moment. Boom, asterisk. A medium-sized tentacle burst out from the ground right next to the figure. Amid the smog, more tentacles erupted from the ground and shot towards the unwelcomed guest's direction. However, the figure in the smog only shifted slightly. Shick, asterisk. The sound of a weapon piercing flesh was heard. In the next moment, Giza's expression changed swiftly and her knees fell to the ground. Ah, 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 the blood mystic screamed in pain. Ellipsis. Rumble, asterisk. In several city districts adjacent to Shield District, dozens of blood-red tentacles broke out of the surface of the ground again. For one, in the nearest nobles districts to the north, a similar giant blood-red tentacle forcibly destroyed a stone house at the peak of Sword District. It tore through the stone and rocks and burst towards the sky. The moment it emerged from the ground, the terrifying tentacles made up of mangled human limbs began exploding from the root. They split into countless smaller tentacles. The smaller tentacles stopped in the air, then began to slowly spin in the area, occasionally shivering. It seemed as if they were scenting. Not long after that, the tentacles shuddered at once and grew rapidly, proliferated, and extended in all directions. At that moment, a slim, white-caped figure abruptly appeared from a corner and landed in front of the tentacles' roots. The tentacles then sensed the presence of flesh nearby. In that instant, the innumerable tentacle branches attacked the caped figure like agitated beasts with an assault covering all directions. The human figure shifted his body slightly and drew out a unique white-hilted blade. The blade flashed. Slash, asterisk. Under the attack of the countless tentacles, the human figure dodged continuously, even leaving behind afterimages. From afar, it actually looked as if he was extending his blade in many different directions. The sharp blade grazed almost every tentacle and inflicted wounds one after another. But that was not all. In the next moment, the tentacles slashed by the blade shuddered. Then, the wounds of these seemingly living tentacles began to darken and shrivel in large swaths. Finally, as if it was burnt, the entire tentacle turned into ashes and scattered into the air. Blood, flesh and ashes drifted instantly into one ball. The caped man brandished his blade again. This time, the strange knife pierced into the root of the small tentacles, that big, blood-red tentacle. The giant tentacle shook violently. Bubbles and large amounts of steam began to emerge from the spot where the blade had pierced into flesh. The tentacle also began to blacken and shrivel, until it turned completely into billowing ash. After being separated from its roots, the tentacles that fell on the ground seemed to have sensed something. They began to twitch frantically and slither away in all directions, to escape from that terrifying man. Right then, the sounds of multiple hurried footsteps arose. Dozens of masked figures clad in gray clothing appeared at the corner of the street. They were equipped in a unique fashion, from armed shields, light crossbows to sleek white-hilted blades. With swift and well-practiced footsteps, they intercepted almost every tentacle's attempt to escape. Their actions were nimble and bodies agile. They were also calm. Then, they raised their arms before swinging their blades down. Shick, swash, slash, asterisk. This time, the tentacles cut by these blades did not turn into ash. Instead, they shed scarlet blood like ordinary wounded limbs. However, their lives were clearly not as strong as their roots. After losing a great deal of blood, the wounded tentacles fell and shriveled up slowly. The man who appeared first, the Star Killer, Nicholas shrugged off his cloak. His expression was solemn as he walked towards the corner of the street without regard for his subordinates engaged in the eradication of the tentacles. There, more white blade guards were escorting an elderly and distinguished man over to the place. According to Madame Calshan's information, there are at least a dozen of these things remaining in and around Shield District. Fortunately, we evacuated the residents in time, otherwise they would have become monster fodder, Your Majesty, the Star Killer reported solemnly. Nuven VII frowned as he watched a white blade guard stomp and slash a twitching tentacle in the distance. Crimson blood flowed from its body. We have tested this. Ordinary anti-mystic equipment will only ensure that they maintain basic maneuverability during an assault on these things. Nicholas noticed the king's gaze and brandished the strange blade in his hand. He said slowly, only legendary anti-mystic equipment like the Severing Soul's blade can eliminate these abhorrent things and allow us to protect ourselves at the same time. The king nodded, his face was terrifying. Gleeward has already set off with the Soul Slayer pike. That calamity will not be gallivanting around for much longer. But these things are still spreading. They're trying to look for more people as their food. A bureaucrat who looked like a garrison officer behind the king said worriedly, they've even appeared out here. They will spread out of Shield District eventually, to catch up to the residents we have evacuated to the other districts, and even those outside the city. Through absorption, they can strengthen continually. It's just that if things keep on going this way, all of Dragon Cloud City. King Nuven abruptly raised his hand and stopped his subordinate's report. His eyes flickered with fury and resolve. Soon, the tentacles in this district were almost cleared entirely. King Nuven clenched his hands into fists and looked up to survey the warriors around him. He yelled at the top of his lungs, White Blade Guards. All the White Blade Guards including Nicholas turned around collectively and bellowed, Sir. Their fierce gazes met with the Northland King's. King Nuven took a heavy step forward. His eyes were bright with fury as he looked intently at every single personal guard of his, the elite White Blade Guards. The Dragon's Imperial Guards. Extit's strongest beings. The sound of earth and rocks collapsing echoed from afar again. King Nuven took a deep breath, the fire in his eyes burned brighter. The old king's firm, elderly voice rang in everyone's ears. Tell me, young fellows, when Extit needs your protection, when Northland needs your fearless assault, are you to sacrifice your lives, to shed your blood? King Nuven turned around. He looked into the distance at the blood-red hydra and its enormous blurry silhouette. He bellowed ferociously. Will you hesitate? Tell me. In that moment, all the White Blade Guards did not hesitate but straightened their bodies and struck their right fists on their left breasts. Thump, asterisk. Dull poundings resonated together, as if it was from one person. It was solemn and shocking. The elite warriors released a deafening bellow, No, Your Majesty. King Nuven turned around and drew out his saber. Shing, asterisk. His face filled with dignity, he nodded at his own personal guards. Very good, Nicholas, you are in charge of dispatch. The Star Killer knelt down on one knee. His face was solemn and respectful as he thumped his fist on his chest. All White Blade Guards are to be equipped with anti-mystic equipment. Walk along Shield District's borders. King Nuven steadily said to the captain of his own team of personal guards, whether it is delaying, intercepting or killing, keep those things detained in Shield District. It can stop thinking about touching another Northlander. Nicholas nodded firmly and got up to issue his commands. Split into 8 units of at least 30. Check the anti-mystic equipment, bring signal arrows along and fire them based on the protocols of war. The Star Killer looked at his subordinates and said coldly, Form circular formations of 5 people and focus on dealing with those things. Chopping and slashing are the most effective methods. Watch your step, don't be tangled up with multiple opponents. Nicholas kicked a big dried, black and shriveled tentacle. He brandished his severing soul's blade. If you encounter a thing as huge as this, send a signal to notify me. King Nuven heaved a sigh. Kalshan said that the more people that Calamity is confronted with, the stronger she grows, so you will have no reinforcements. The king extended his right hand and pressed firmly on Nicholas's right shoulder. His eyes looked straight ahead. Neither the patrols nor the recruits have any anti-mystic equipment. They would have only been sent to die in vain. Our hopes lie in Gleeward and you, in the Soul Slayer pike and the severing soul's blade. Gleeward is already looking for that Calamity. There's nothing better than the Soul Slayer pike when dealing with it, and what you have to do now is... King Nuven's eyes glimmered, to trap the rat in the cage, completely severing all of its strength and all its possible paths of retreat. Nicholas exchanged a meaningful glance with the king and nodded firmly and respectfully. We will have no problems, your majesty. Please wait in the palace for news of our victorious return. But King Nuven shook his head. I am going with you. In that second, Nicholas's eyes widened. Your majesty, it is not safe up ahead. Gravely, King Nuven raised a hand and stopped his words. More than half the White Blade Guards are here. Heroic Spirit Palace is not safer than it is here now. King Nuven's eyes was filled with unquestionable majesty, and I have never doubted that, wherever the White Blade Guards are present, it is the safest place in the world. Do you disagree with this statement? Nicholas was shocked. In that moment, he did not say a word but clenched his teeth and nodded solemnly. King Nuven let go of his shoulder and smiled openly. Come, my brave warriors. Today, on the land of our hometown, we will charge into a battle between mankind and the non-humans. The old king raised his head towards the cliff of the sky, at the statue of a soldier holding a pike. Today, we will follow in Reikaru's footsteps, to kill this legendary calamity. The White Blade Guards were somber. Nicholas's pupils constricted as he gradually tightened his grip on the weapon in his hand. Nuven VII turned towards the Hydra in the distance. He took a deep breath and slowly said, the crazy criminals who have committed blood debts in our Northland, whether it was 600 years ago or now. The absurd freaks who have brought endless disaster and killed for thousands of years. The wicked who thrive on massacre and bloodshed. The scum who see us as ants. King Nuven clenched his fists and his eyes shone ferociously. Destroy them all. Ellipsis. Giza suddenly slumped to the ground. Her once ruddy face suddenly turned ashen and shriveled. Moreover, the dark and gloomy pallor on her face was even growing darker continuously. Behind Giza, the Hydra, Kilika sensed its master's state and started trembling frantically. Following Kilika's movements, several tentacles erupted once more around that human figure and charged towards the unwelcome guest. Slash, shik, asterisk. 2 sounds of a sword piercing into flesh rang from within the smog. No, Kilika, that's, Giza shrieked in pain, her whole body trembled and her complexion turned more ashen, as if she was suffering. Kilika's body began to contort uncontrollably all of a sudden. Crack, asterisk. The ground between the mystic and the human figure split open. The giant, blood-red tentacle extended from Kilika frantically contorted as it struggled free from the ground. It trembled continuously, as if it was experiencing the most awful, savage torture. Beginning from the figure in the smog, the blood-red tentacle formed by mangled limbs began to blacken and wither rapidly. Like a fine cloth dipped in ink, the tentacle's blackened and shriveled areas spread continuously along its base. It extended towards Kilika, and then Giza. The blood mystic raised her blackened and shriveled face, gritted her teeth and yelled furiously, "Don't even think about it." In the next moment, right before the continuously blackening and shriveling tentacle could reach Kilika with that terrifying momentum, it automatically swelled from its base and ruptured all of a sudden. Boom, asterisk. A large amount of blood gushed out. At that moment, you could say that Giza Streelman looked pathetic, and she had a nervous look on her face. Like when a lizard loses its tail to fight for survival. If it had been 1 moment slower in its action, it would have suffered irreparable damage. As the blackening and shriveling areas finally reached the point of rupture and could not continue, it thoroughly transformed the giant tentacle into a useless, withered branch. In the air, the only sound left was Giza's panting as she laid on the ground. Her complexion finally began to recover its ruddy color. The mystic lifted her head and gritted her teeth as she glared straight ahead. She glared at the figure who walked towards her from the smog. He was approaching slowly, and he was accompanied by an unpleasant screech. Screech. Giza rose from the ground and frowned slightly. The approaching human had a tall stature, but his pace was peculiar. With every step, his right leg had to be dragged. Like a cripple. Screech. The unpleasant sounds were still in the air, and it sounded like exquisitely made utensils were being scrapped on coarse flooring. Finally, a gruff voice came from within the curtain of smog. Shield District is a woeful place. As the smog gradually dispersed, it revealed a strong, dauntless man. It conceals Dragon Cloud City's darkest, most cryptic colors beneath the Northlanders' expansive magnanimity and optimism. Screech. The noise persisted. The crippled man looked about 30 to 40 years old. His facial features were mostly flat, except for his tall nose. A chin covered with stubbly hair made him appear rather boorish. Some people were born into such an unfortunate place, with only poverty and hardship left to them by their fathers. What they acquired was tenacity and grit. The man limped forward, his tone was filled with grief. Screech. Giza's brow furrowed more tightly. She had found the source of the noise. The man dragged a 2-meter-long metal pike behind him. The pitch-black pikehead was dragged across the ground as it emitted an unpleasant screeching. The blood mystic's eyes locked onto that pike and her eyes filled with strange colors. Some of them wanted to stand out instead and traversed land and water to arrive here. Trading their present, the period of time that was most valuable to them, they gained an uncharted future, all for the sake of wanting to leave something worth commemorating behind, for themselves, their family, and later generations. The cripple dragged the pike strenuously with his right hand. As his figure turned, the left side of his face was revealed. Giza saw clearly his most prominent feature. This man had no left ear. What was left in its stead was a round hole, as if it had been shaved off at the base. But regardless of who they were, they had no choice but to rely on other people for just a mouthful of rice in this lousy place called Shield District that lacked even a complete wall to shelter them from the wind and snow. In this place, some people were in a hurry to make a name for themselves and are petty towards the other citizens. Some people are illiterate and live trembling in fear. Some people live in loneliness and despair while covered head to toe in injuries. Some people are hot-headed, rash, and possess a fiery temper. Screech. The man continued to limp forward, his expression sorrowful, and his tone gloomy. They were just ordinary people, but they were also pitiful. But they are still working for the people with the most power in Extit, doing the most despicable jobs with an attitude to be content and the most determined smile, an attitude unique to Northlanders. They get the most meager salary, hold on to the most pitiful hope, and live in the most wretched lives. They don't have matchless power, no great achievements, no honorable glory, no noble titles, but they still grit their teeth, swallow their grievances, cry, tense their muscles and struggle to live. The man stopped in his limping footsteps and stood before Giza. He turned around and glanced at the ruins. A child's broken hand lay there quietly. The man suddenly turned back to her. This time, his gaze was fixed unwaveringly on the mystic. His eyes were filled with indifference, loneliness, disappointment, pain, hatred, and a deathly stillness. This is Shield District, a filthy place where even the snow comes in black swaths, the cripple said flatly. The man swept his gaze past the wreckage around him, and a hint of pain appeared in his eyes. In the great Extit, majestic heroic spirit palace, splendid glory of Northland, we struggled and gasped for breath like dying men. We were more Northlandish than the strongest Northland man. The crippled, one-eared man had a cold look as he raised the pike in his hand and stared at Giza. And you, even want to snatch this sorrowful and unfortunate chance, this chance where we grit our teeth and struggle to fight for hope from our hands. The man gently closed his eyes, his grip tightened on the pike in his hand. His words spoken with absolute pain. In your eyes, we are, just like bugs, to be trampled on and kneaded around as you wish. Right, Calamity. The blood mystic heaved a long sigh, her eyes felt incomparably heavy. She did not respond to the man's words, as if she did not want to waste time. She fixed her gaze only on the pike. A few seconds later, Giza finally said indifferently while she comforted Kilika and while she panted, 600 over years later, the wielder of Soul Slayer Pike, is a lame person like you. The man snorted. Blood Mystic raised her head to glance at the cliff of the sky. She looked at humanity's hero, Rikaru Extit's soldierly statue, and then at the crippled, one-eared man. Giza frowned. It was as if she was making a comparison. Moments later, Giza breathed out a long sigh. Isn't the difference too drastic? The man stared at her intently and did not say a word. Giza said scornfully, how is it that in this era, a mere supreme class, can already master a legendary anti-mystic weapon? Swoosh, asterisk. With a quick turn from the one-eared man's arms, the pike swept up a gust of wind. The pitch-black pikehead pointed at Giza, and the pikehead vibrated slightly. Hum. It was as if the pike had a life of its own. Drew Gleeward, an ordinary heavy swordsman from Dragon Cloud City, reporting for service, he said in a low voice. Wielding the Soul Slayer pike, the lame Gleeward said coldly, just saying, all of Shield District is under my protection. Oh, Giza's face turned cold, she ground her teeth, but she did not show her typical smile. Then you should thank me. She looked around at the wreckage of the surrounding streets and shook her head. I cleaned your home up so well. Gleeward was not provoked by her words. The man simply dragged his crippled leg and took a slow step forward. What happened just now was a mere greeting, you should know the origins of this weapon. Gleeward tapped the sinister pike in his hands and said softly, when I took over it 10 years ago, Merc could have almost nagged my other ear off. The man's eyes started to gain clarity. Soul Slayer pike, King Rikaru's mighty weapon. All life in this world, from the great dragons to the ants, from the demons to the flora. Once stabbed by this pike, Gleeward stared at the pikehead, his eyes sparkled brilliantly, all vitality in the whole body will vanish. In that instant, the lame, one-eared man's presence started to change, as if he had arrived at the most devastating battlefield. Giza did not speak. Gleeward raised his head and accentuated each of his words coldly. This is death's touch. All of your life will leave your body with just the lightest touch. The young lady who had always smiled gently now stared emotionlessly at the pike. Her eyes fixated unwaveringly, as if she recalled something. This is the legendary anti-mystic equipment Soul Slayer Pike's matchless ability. The heavy weapon swordsman who had scars all over his body spat. Elimination. Gleeward retracted his pike and scrutinized his opponent. Every legendary anti-mystic equipment was born to counter one or more mystics, and this legendary pike was designed specially to deal with you. Gleeward exhaled gently on the pikehead. Blood Calamity, enemy of life. A legendary anti-mystic equipment cast just for you, the B*TCH who can't be sealed with normal conventions. In the next moment, Gleeward's eyes sparkled with cold rays. Boom, asterisk. His undamaged left leg kicked the ground with a loud bang, his strong yet scarred body dashed forth with an astonishing force towards the sullen-looking Giza. With a matchless momentum as if it was charging forward in a battlefield, the sinister Soul Slayer Pike was thrust out with an indomitable spirit. Asterisk hum. In the air, the pitch-black pikehead released delighted vibrations. The vibrations then grew with urgency, as if it longed to release death's touch. Chapter 173 The Blade of Purification. The moon faded into the west. Bang! A loud boom came from the center of Shield District. The once formidable Hydra, Kilika, dug into the ground once more and vanished. In the looming dust cloud, a one-eared man hauled a long metal spear with him, shambling with a limp at an eerily fast pace onto a hill of debris. Gleeward glanced around. Through his peripheral vision, he caught a glimpse of some blood-red tentacles frantically burrowing into the ground. The chief of Shield District lifted the Soul Slayer Pike, turning the pikehead around. The Soul Slayer Pike began to vibrate when it pointed to his left. Hum. Gleeward no longer hesitated, he strode forward and darted towards the direction. Swish. With a speed faster than a human could move, his pikehead stabbed the dust cloud. Bang. A ruin exploded, a disheveled-looking girl materialized within the blasted ruins, dodged the pike, and flitted off. Gleeward did not slow down. He chased after Giza relentlessly and aimed at her head. The pikehead zoomed past her left cheek. A sizzle arose from her face, and her cheek began to melt. Damn it! As the blood mystic mumbled curses to herself, a number of tentacles stretched out from beneath the hem of her dress and propelled her away from Gleeward's spear. Very well. Gleeward stopped advancing, his eyes filled with hostility. He said calmly, keep dodging, keep running, keep hiding, this is what you should have done, Calamity. Gnashing her teeth, Giza glared at Gleeward darkly until the latter charged at her again. She ducked and charged through the wreckage of a building. The tentacles beneath her skirt swung swiftly, allowing her to move as fast as the wind. Gleeward chased her relentlessly. Boom. All of a sudden, a blood-red monster with 4 tentacles and 2 crab claws crawled out of the ground beside Gleeward's feet. Thump. The lame man halted, stomping on a huge boulder to ease the inertia, and successfully dodged a strike that was only inches from his nose. It was a revolting, oddly shaped creature made of dozens of gooey, severed limbs, except for the part that seemed to resemble a head, which was a huge rotating eye. Gleeward frowned. This is your combatant. Giza did not respond, she merely stared at him coldly. The monster, then, stretched into the height and width of several grown men and charged at Gleeward from 6 different directions. The tentacles reached for his limbs. One of the crab claws struck at his crotch, the other aimed at his head. Faced with these impending, life-threatening attacks, Gleeward nevertheless stayed idle and showed no intention to duck aside. His eyes were fixed on the mystic. This is a bad idea, Gleeward said flatly while remaining still and while he watched his opponent closely. A second later, the cripple moved his gaze, then threw his Soul Slayer Pike in an arc. At the moment his enemy's fatal move was about to touch his body, it sliced across the monster's tentacle. Shick. The monster twitched, its once destructive tentacles and crab claws shook uncontrollably. Witnessing this, Giza's face contorted and her body began to convulse. In the meantime, Gleeward sped down the hill. Behind him, the monster trembled, writhed, then cracked open like a dry burnt coal, and collapsed. Ah! 5 meters away, Giza could not help but let out another shriek. She shuddered, covering her gradually blackening face that was filled with agony. How does it feel? Gleeward asked in a deep voice. He strode at a quick and calm pace towards his inhuman opponent. Kilika, or the other monsters you created, they are essentially yourself, am I correct? Enduring the pain, the blood mystic lifted her left hand, reaching for the dying monster and gritting her teeth. Splorch. Before turning completing into black ash, the monster exploded, and blood spilled everywhere. As the monster sacrificed itself, the pained expression on Giza's face lessened. But in the next instant, Gleeward, whose expression did not change and who had hidden his killing intent, had already appeared in front of her. He thrust the pike forward mercilessly. Giza screamed and retreated swiftly with a grimace. But it was too late. The power of eradication surged at will through Gleeward's body and his attacks sped up. Hiss. With a sharp swish, the black pikehead of the Soul Slayer pike, as though it suddenly gained sentience, made an odd turn in the air. The spear bent at a perplexing angle and stabbed into Giza's left hand. Ah! The blood mystic screamed in pain, and this time, her screams were louder than before. A black mass visible to the naked eye extended to her entire body starting from her left arm. Gleeward spun the pike coolly. He knew the elimination ability of the weapon had shown its true power. At the instant the Soul Slayer pike touched her, without hesitation, Giza turned her right hand into a blood-red blade. Ka-shak! Before the blackness spread to her torso, the grim-faced blood mystic chopped off her left arm. The arm fell onto the ground, then it swelled and exploded before turning into coal pieces and ash. Giza clutched at what remained of her left arm and took an agonized step backwards. Well done, can you feel pain at all? Gleeward voiced his approval. Nevertheless, he had no intention of going easy on her. The girl's silhouette and the coal-black pikehead that flew at her were reflected in his grim eyes. The pikehead shot at the disheveled-looking Giza with a whoosh, just as it was about to stab her face. Giza covered the stump of her severed left arm and gnashed her teeth. Her glare, directed at Gleeward, was brimming with despair. A contented smile finally emerged on Gleeward's face. At that very moment, streaks of branching blood-red veins surfaced on Giza's cheeks. The spear was unstoppable as it moved forward. Suddenly, a silhouette burst out of the debris. Boom! The figure stepped between Giza and Gleeward. Thump! A metallic clash rang instead of the stabbing sound Gleeward expected. Holding the spear in both hands, he frowned. The tip of Soul Slayer pike stopped in front of Giza, just half an inch away from the tip of her nose. The weapon was grasped tightly in the arms of a short, brawny figure whose hands were grazed by the pikehead, even though the person's hands were already bleeding because he tried to hold onto the pike. The weakened Giza panted. The blood-red patches on her cheeks quivered. She gazed at the pikehead before her with a cryptic expression and what seemed like a half-smile. Gleeward, on the other hand, turned white. What the? Gleeward stared in disbelief at the short sturdy man who clutched at his spear stubbornly, a man who appeared and dressed just like an ordinary Northlander. It's you, you're... Gleeward gawked at the ashen-faced man who stood before him, and called the latter by his nickname. Big Leather Belt from the Glacial Centuries. Seeing Gleeward's reaction, Giza beamed for the first time in a while. Ellipsis. In the outermost region of Shield District, Nicholas turned a gigantic tentacle into ash with a swift cut. Behind him, slashes and stabbing sounds echoed. The elite warriors of the White Blade Guards were carrying out their duty to eradicate the numerous smaller tentacles. The Star Killer scowled and stepped away from the battleground. A dozen feet away, King Nuven, who was surrounded by several members of the White Blade Guards, squinted at the head of his personal guards. Your Majesty, sounds of horses galloping came from the distance, followed by the cavalier's report. Words from the secret room, Kilika has vanished. Wonderful. King Nuven's expression brightened. He nodded and said to a nobleman behind him, it proves that our strategy is working. That calamity, it does not dare to fight the Soul Slayer pike. Nicholas, who had just eliminated a tentacle, approached him. We employ the best tactics, confront the blood calamity with small, elite teams equipped with anti-mystic gears, while other teams round it up and cut off its energy supply. The Star Killer put on a stern expression, his eyes sharp. Your Majesty, we have suppressed it. King Nuven gave a firm nod of approval. Behind the king, a small group of Northland soldiers arrived on horseback with a few officers and nobles who came to deliver their messages. Your Majesty, we still do not have any news of the Prince of Constellation and your granddaughter. King Nuven's expression did not change, as if he did not care about his granddaughter's survival. Also, the aristocrats and citizens from the other districts are discussing this matter animatedly. The discussions are especially prominent from the citizens you evacuated. Many people saw that monster, and there are all sorts of chatter about the calamity invading the city. Many enlisted militias are requesting to be immediately equipped so that they may join the battle. The situation is slightly chaotic. The patrol teams are finding it rather difficult to control the situation. King Nuven turned around, frowning. He pondered for a while, and then gave an order, reply Madam Kalshan, keep an eye on that thing, and make sure everyone keeps in touch. Also, inform the chief garrison officer to send out all patrol units available to each street to placate the citizens. Tell them, in the name of the king, that we will keep this matter under control in no time. Ordinary troops without anti-mystic equipment cannot be of much help. As of now, any form of military recruitment is prohibited. A number of bureaucrats nodded and continued, while evacuating the people in Shield District, we also received word from outside the city. 6 of your counts and their vassals had sent their messengers and messenger crows 3 times in a row, hoping to be granted to send in their troops as reinforcements. Sending thousands more people into the mouth of that calamity, the king snapped, reply them, the Walton family recognizes and values their loyalty, but this is no ordinary battle. A huge army will only worsen the situation. A stenographer was recording the king's speech. Another person said worriedly, on the other hand, the 4 archdukes implore you to put your own safety first, to head back to Heroic Spirit Palace and maybe explain. King Nuvan nodded and gave his subordinates a wave of dismissal. Ask Lisbon to deal with those nobles, including the archdukes. Say, the king is on a hunting trip. At a time like this, they had better refrain from providing suggestions. Having received their orders, the messengers sped off on their horses. Your Majesty, you know they are right, you should stay in the palace, the Star Killer said calmly. The king shook his head. Most of the White Blade guards are out on missions. We are unable to summon troops into the city. You want me to stay in a nearly empty palace with 4 archdukes who have ulterior motives in their personal guards? King Nuvan snorted coldly. Your king butchered an archduke not too long ago, I am contemplating which option is safer for me. Nicholas nodded, and flung the blood off his severing soul's blade. At that moment, Your Majesty, boss, look, a White Blade guard shouted, pointing at the sky. In the night sky, a flare soared into the air above Shield District, followed by a sharp crack. The other White Blade guards were alarmed. Signal arrow. It means, Nicholas's gaze sharpened. It is the first unit in the eastern region. They found a troublesome bastard. We have to take action immediately. In the meantime, on top of another area on the other side of the district, a spark shone in the air, accompanied by a whooshing sound. King Nuvan frowned. 2 locations. But then, a third signal arrow rose into the sky from the distance. Simultaneous deployment, something is wrong. King Nuvan stared at the flare and frowned. We allocated the route strictly, dividing the troops to gradually surround Shield District from east and west. While the 1st and 5th units are clearing up the paths ahead as vanguards, there is no way the units at the back would meet with that bastard. As he spoke, the 4th signal arrow was fired. Nicholas paled. Multiple signals at the same time. There can only be one explanation, Your Majesty, he said, panting. New monsters are breaking out of the ground. Therefore, other than the 1st and 5th units, other men have also encountered. He did not manage complete his statement. Boom. A thunderous blast sounded. From within the dust cloud, a humongous creature swung its countless tentacles in the center of Shield District. Everyone on the spot gaped at the monster, the Hydra, Kilika. How is this happening? King Nuvan gritted his teeth, glaring at the nightmarish monster that emerged once again. He inhaled deeply, glancing at the warriors around him. Considering how massive the target is, shouldn't it be afraid of the Soul Slayer pike? Gleeward. King Nuvan halted his discussion. The old king grimaced, he had obviously realized something. A silence ensued and lasted for seconds, until Nicholas kept the severing soul's blade into the sheath on his back, kneeled down slowly, tightened the lace of his boots, and nodded solemnly. Your Majesty, I request to be granted permission to depart immediately. The Star Killer said in a very soft and calm voice, the cleaning operations have to be put aside for now. I must bring my severing soul's blade along, to save Gleeward. Ellipsis. In the other area of Shield District, Black Sword's yell boomed, duck. Thales glared at the blood-red tentacle that charged at them, clenched his teeth, and fled with Little Rascal. However, their speed was simply not enough. The tentacle that slithered on the ground moved as fast as the wind. The next thing they knew, it had arrived in front of them. It then sprung up abruptly, and shot towards Thales with a swoosh. It was about as tall as a grown man. Swoosh. Damn it, Thales cursed internally, watching the tentacle flying towards him. It's impossible to dodge at this time. As Little Rascal screeched, the strange pulses surged within Thales once more. Thales felt time slow down. As seconds slowly ticked away, he could discern what made up the tentacle that lunged for him, several human parts from skin to muscles, veins, and bones. In the air, the tentacle began to split, revealing a row of sharp teeth inside it. It now looked like a hungry alien snake. Thales felt his stomach turn. What the hell is that thing? Meanwhile, there was a surge of energy that welled up in his body. Thales sensed a new strength in his body while he tried to predict where the tentacle would land. Then, he gave Little Rascal a shove and threw himself towards the opposite direction. The tentacle brushed past Thales' right hand and Little Rascal's glasses. The 2 children rolled out of its way and stumbled onto the ground. Bang! The blood-red tentacle missed its target and crashed into a plank in the ruins. It no longer had any more chances because in the next moment, a small red sword sliced through the air and came charging towards the tentacle in a spin. Thud. The projectile was strong and precise. It nailed the tentacle onto the plank, immobilizing it instantly. The hilt of the small red sword still shook. The tentacle wriggled vigorously, but was still unable to break free. Thales lay on the ground, panting and traumatized. His right hand was sore due to overexertion. He turned his head, casting his gaze on Black Sword, who lay on the ground covered in wounds. The latter's right hand hung in the air, stuck in the position where he had just thrown his sword. Little Rascal let out a delayed scream of disgust. Her feet paddled, pushing herself backwards. She tried not to look at the tentacle. Thales sat up and stared dumbly at the wriggling tentacle at his feet. Good call, kid. Black Sword sighed weakly and laid his head back onto the ground. Your reflexes. Before Black Sword even finished his sentence, the tentacle split in half from the spot that was nailed onto the plank by the blade, and freed itself in an instant. Thales panicked. Shit. Watch out, Black Sword shouted. This time, however, Thales could not react in time. He was captured by the tentacle that lunged for him. The tentacle engulfed his left leg, his waist, his chest, and his head. It covered his eyes, taking away his vision entirely. No, little rascal screeched. Thales shuddered. It felt sticky, greasy, warm, trembled and contracted frequently. It was even somewhat dizzying. He was feeling oddly comfortable, until a slippery, wet, warm, and round object rolled across his left cheek and stopped at the center of his forehead. The round object began to tremble, as though it was giving him a face massage. The semi-conscious Thales mused. This sensation is like placing a palm on one's eyelids and feeling the eyeball quiver against the palm. Thinking of this, Thales shuddered. He knew what that rascal, wet, warm, round ball that continuously massaged the bridge of his nose was now. It was someone's eyeball. FCK. 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 The feeling of nausea washed over him, and he instantly recovered from the hallucination. Overwhelmed with terror and disgust, Thales desperately swung his right arm, that was somehow left unbound by the tentacle, trying to get himself out of that foul thing. The tentacle tightened its hold. Thales made a futile attempt to loosen the tentacle. His breathing became heavier and his vision blurred. Little Rascal and Black Sword's anxious voices traveled into his ears, but they did not sound real. And the eyeball was shuddering even faster. FCK. His heartbeat quickened. He could hear his blood rush and pound in his veins. Thales was suffocating and slowly slipping into unconsciousness. What do I do? A thought flitted through his mind. That's right, I still have. He stretched his right arm over to the back of his waist to reach for the JC dagger Jala gave him. Dagger, dagger. However, when he touched his waist, he felt only the warmth and greasiness. The tentacle had bound his waist as well. At that moment, Thales felt as his heart chill. A wave of despair filled his chest. Shit, what do I do? His right hand felt the back of his own waist, but found nothing. What do I do? It was then when a sharp object slit his right palm while he was groping around. The sting of pain brought him a sliver of consciousness. He gathered his last remaining strength and held tightly onto that strange rod-like thing, drew it out, and brought it to his head. That was how the accident was triggered. At that moment, Thales raised the strange object and the wave of heat that traveled from within him, from his heart to his right hand, erupted swiftly. It spread throughout his body, scorching him like a blaze. He felt pain, heat, and cramps all over his body, inside out, in every corner, every tissue and cell. He started hearing imaginary sounds. At first, it sounded like rushing blood in his arteries and veins, but they soon warped into many different sounds, tidal waves, a volcano eruption, or even storms. Thales opened his mouth to scream, but nothing came out except for the fishy, salty taste of the tentacle, as well as a disgusting organ formed by some unknown parts of a person's body slithering past his tongue. Nevertheless, he could not care less about the disgusting tentacle that bound him. All he could feel was the burning sensation. In the next second, however, Thales felt a shudder as the pressure around his body loosened up and his vision returned. His breathing began to even out. He no longer felt a weight on his chest and his face. The tentacle had released him and slipped away quietly. At that moment, the burning sensation in his chest and right hand slowly faded. Thales was panting heavily, struggling to sit up while he gasped for air after such a life-threatening event. He spotted two pairs of astonished eyes. Black Sword and Little Rascal were staring at him with gaping mouths, as though they had seen something shocking. Thales was startled, then realized that they were not looking at him. He looked down at his right hand and squinted. In Thales' right hand was the weapon Black Sword threw at him earlier, the small red sword. Yet at that moment, its dull-colored tip radiated a blinding red glow. This is... Thales stared at the small red sword like a puppet. He stared at its original dull and lusterless tip. The red light gradually became lighter, then brighter, eventually gaining a color similar to the blade. It looked as if it had just been wetted. It was not the only anomaly. The part of that repelled the tentacle that made contact with the small red sword began to change. Thales had seen this before, back in the birch tree forest, when the fortress flower fought the blood mystic. The tentacle on Thales began to dissolve, wither, darken, and eventually turned into dust and faded into the air, as though it had encountered its natural enemy. In the end, what remained on Thales was a layer of black ash. What did you do? Black Sword was frowning as he stared at the smallsword and muttered, could it be the legendary? Little Rascal blinked in confusion. Before Thales could react, a swooshing sound like tidal waves rang in his ears, as though it echoed in his veins. Whoosh! It sounded as if it came from somewhere far away. A moment later, the rumble of ocean waves turned into a deep murmur. My. Thales quivered in fear. He looked up at Black Sword and Little Rascal who were simply staring at him. The former's gaze traveled between Thales' face and the sword in the boy's hand with a doubtful expression. Neither of them seemed to have heard the voice. It was a rather familiar scene. Thales looked around in panic, but he saw nothing other than the ruins, the night sky, and the glow of the smallsword. What is this? What's going on? Thales stared at the glowing smallsword in his hand dumbfoundedly. He was about to say something when the monotonous voice became clearer. Words and sentences began to form. My name. The voice sounded like that of an old man from a great distance, as though it was traveling through layers of wooden boards. Thales could not tell what language it was, but he knew the meaning of the words. My name is Blade of Purification. Thales' jaw dropped, gaping at the glowing sword in his hand. The blade of purification. Thales was stupefied, but that was not what shocked him the most. Amid the thunderous roar of tidal waves, the voice uttered its last two lines. It has been a long time, the voice said slowly, my blood brother. Thales shuddered. Blood, be our brother. A second later, the voice and the glow of the smallsword faded away instantly. Cold snow drifted down, as though nothing had just happened, except for what happened with the tip of that smallsword. It had turned from a rusty dark red to bright red, like the color of fresh blood. Under the night sky, the flustered trio gawked at one another. Each one wore a different expression. Chapter 174 The Truth About Elimination. Dragon Cloud City, the intersection between Armor District and Shield District. Loud roars were coming from Shield District, together with a faintly discernible vibration. We should disperse along with those residents. A valiant swordswoman with black hair stood on one of the roads. She was wearing a light armor and a pair of thick black gloves. Furrowing her brow, she stared at the tall figure in front of her. It's not our duty to interfere in things that do not concern us, nor is it part of our principles to bring trouble upon ourselves. However, the figure paid no heed to those words. Staring at Shield District from afar, he looked at the massive, ravenous, and unusual blood-red monster from top to bottom. Is this why Raphael asked us to leave? Pursing his lips, Cohen seemed worried. He furrowed and relaxed his eyebrows non-stop. Is this what the Kingdom's Secret Intelligence Department has set out to do? Did you hear what those residents were saying? This creature is Kilika, the legendary Hydra. Clenching his fists tightly, Cohen's gaze was filled with displeasure. It's one of those calamities, those mystics, a legend that we only read about in family records and archives. Raphael. Staring at the considerably ruined Shield District, Cohen's breathing quickened. Is this your doing? Did you plan this? Furrowing her brows, Miranda stared at her cohort with a complex expression. The disciplinary officers didn't evacuate the area for no reason. It's not something you should worry about. Dragon Cloud City definitely has the knowledge to fight against calamities. Watching as the Hydra extended another gigantic tentacle, Miranda sighed and shook her head. Besides, no matter what Raphael has done, or is about to do, it's not something we can interfere with. Cohen continued to stare at the Hydra. His blonde hair was covered in snow, however he did not notice it at all. That's Shield District, and Big Leather Belt lives there. We even sat in his little house earlier. That man who fought against the orcs as part of the glacial sentries, remember him? Listening to the sounds of destruction, Cohen's eyes were filled with grief. Him and his daughter. Miranda did not say a word, she only lowered her gaze a little. After quite a while, she quietly said, there's nothing we can do. Cohen became silent. The vibration increased in magnitude as Kilika the Hydra's movements intensified. Do you know what the most ironic thing is? A few seconds later, Cohen expressionlessly said, the day we, you, me and Raphael became seeds, Master Shao stood on top of the giant knight statue and spoke to us. Having heard that, Miranda subconsciously held on to the hilt of her sword. The Tower of Eradication's mission is to preserve the last, purest and strongest spark for the sake of humanity. As the Hydra wreaked havoc in the distance, Cohen calmly said, to pass down the powers of eradication, along with the spirit and mission of our ancestors. Cohen's gaze was filled with complex emotions. And to always be vigilant as well as ready. The day those creatures return, the swords of eradication will be unsheathed once again. Miranda raised her head, staring at the horrifying Hydra, she gritted her teeth softly. Regardless of race, kingdom of origin and succession, we will revive our ancestors' mission, and reenact the glory of the Calamity Hunters. In the darkest days of humanity's last moments, on the most hellish of battlefields, armed with swords and hope, we will fight with no regard for death. We will charge towards the almost invincible calamities. This is the first and final mission of the Tower of Eradication. As a seed who carries great hopes, Raphael, having said this, Cohen sighed. He brought a calamity. Stop your meaningless and unfounded speculations, Miranda coldly cut him off. We don't know what Raphael and the Kingdom's Secret Intelligence Department have done at all. The Kingdom's Secret Intelligence Department may have more important political ends. Perhaps, if they hadn't done this, the Hydra would have appeared in Eternal Star City instead of Dragon Cloud City. Cohen sneered. Politics. The blonde police officer shook his head in disappointment. The Tower of Eradication passes down skills with the purpose of protecting humanity. It transcends politics. This is its most praiseworthy trait. No matter how bad the Tower of Eradication's relationship with Constellation is, it never rejected students from Constellation. However, we took these shared treasures of humanity that have been passed down for more than 1,000 years, and used them as a tool to kill each other. Cohen lowered his head. His voice was low and deep. All the swordsmen are proud to be from the Tower of Eradication. However, through these 600-something years, how many swordsmen of Eradication died by the calamities as they protected humanity? On the other hand, how many were killed by sword styles and powers of eradication that were passed down from the same tower? Miranda's expression remained unchanged. However, her voice was a little awkward. Not every student can escape the constraints of politics. And not every student shares the Tower of Eradication's aspirations and aim. But, Raphael, Cohen heaved a loud sigh. With his capacity, compared to us, he's supposed to be the one to transcend all these things, right? Miranda stared at him in silence. A few seconds later, the swordswoman stopped looking grim. Instead, she chuckled softly. Cohen, staring at Cohen, who turned his head back abruptly, Miranda smiled. Has anyone told you that? You are perhaps not made to be a suzerain, or even a noble. The swordswoman flashed a meaningful smile and asked profoundly. The heir to Walla Hill, who is kind and also an idealist. Having heard that, Cohen froze. He gawked at Miranda in a daze. He turned and stared at the roof beneath his feet. There was a hint of desolation and loneliness in his eyes. This time, Cohen was silent for a very long time. Finally, the police officer faintly said, "Oh, I know. From the very first day I grew up to understand these things. I knew that there was no way that I could become a good suzerain." Even though Cohen's voice was tranquil, it made Miranda's heart sink for no reason. No way. Miranda did not say anything. At this moment, they raised their heads as though they had sensed something. The next moment, they leapt down from the roof vigilantly. Quickly and nimbly, they hid behind a wall. A minute later, two figures swept past the already evacuated street. One pair of footsteps were strange and light, as though the person was running with his feet pressed close to the ground. The other pair of footsteps were more normal and steadier. From their movements, they don't seem to be slouches, Miranda thought as she hid in the darkness. However, it seems like both of them are injured, as their movements are unsteady. I think that we should go look for him in Shield District, even though that thing's there. One of the voices sounded young and impatient. He seemed very dissatisfied with the other person. Can't you say something? Oh, all right, I forgot, but, can't you show some reaction? My God, don't make those hand gestures that I can't understand. Wait. Seeing both of them clearly, Miranda froze. The next moment, Miranda rose, to Cohen's surprise. She left her hiding place and stopped the two men. Alerted, the two uninvited guests stopped running and got into an offensive position. However, their enmity was soon gone. You're the one next to Lady Caesar that day. Thales' attendant, Wya Casso, stared at the swordswoman as he held his saber. He widened his eyes in surprise. Miss Miranda from Broken Dragon Fortress. Why are you here? Wya inquired in shock. It's a long story, how about the both of you? Miranda furrowed her brows. What are you looking for? Is it something to do with that calamity? Wya froze and turned his head, feeling a little hesitant. She's from the Arun family, and she's even the heir to the Archduke of the Northern Territory, who tried to usurp the throne. The prince's disappearance. However, the next moment, Wya furrowed his brows a little. He saw that there was something off about Miranda's expression as well. Both of them felt the tension in the air at the same time. They turned. Wearing half a silver mask and silver prosthetics, the person behind Wya trembled. Fixing his fractured arm on his body, Ralph the Phantom Wind follower was fixated on the blonde police officer. His eyes were red, and his hands continued to tremble non-stop. He ran his hand over his throat, but as if it was scalding hot, he abruptly removed his hand. Soon, Ralph's gaze was filled with hatred and fury. Puzzled, Cohen narrowed his eyes. Scratching his head, he stared at the strange, short-haired man, who was wearing a silver mask. He also observed the man's lower body, which was obviously secured with prosthetics even though it was covered with his clothes. Why is he looking at me like this? Does he have something against me? Excuse me, enduring the man's extremely hostile gaze, the police officer carefully asked in bewilderment, have we met before? Cohen soon did not need to hesitate any longer. The next second, Ralph swung his right hand, and a hidden blade shot out from the sleeve covering his arm. When he saw the familiar hidden blade, Cohen trained his gaze on it. A memory from not too long ago flashed across his mind. It was that night. The disaster sword, Groudon. The girl with the dual blades. Himself. And the police officer frowned before he bent his back slightly and pressed his hand on the hilt of his sword. Miranda and Wya were both momentarily stunned. They stared bemusedly at the two people who were ready to jump at each other's throats. "So, you aren't dead yet, my old friend from Red Street Market." Cohen warily took half a step back. With a gaze as sharp as a blade, he spoke with an icy tone in his voice, "Blood Bottle Gang crook." The part of Ralph's face uncovered by the mask turned darker with every passing moment. He let out a low growl and clenched his fists tighter. Ellipsis. The sloshing sounds of blood and flesh scraping against each other rose into the air from all over. It sounded like thousands of snakes madly swimming forward from every single direction. Just how many threats, enemies and dangers did those scraping sounds indicate? Amid those bizarre sloshing sounds, Nicholas opened his eyes gently below a broken roof. The power of eradication in his body started circulating in him in a strange fashion, surging through his entire body in waves. In the next moment, the Star Killer broke through the roof like a bolt of lightning descending down to earth with an astonishing momentum. Bang! Then, as Nicholas's figure came into view, what appeared in front of him were around a dozen blood-red tentacles of various sizes. The tentacles shuddered simultaneously and attacked him from different directions. The airborne Nicholas would originally not have been able to dodge it. But his body started to shine in a bizarre manner, and became indistinct. All the tentacles reaching out to Nicholas curled up, then proceeded to lash, strike, and pierce him. And these tentacles coming to seize his life swept past his ears, armpits, the bottom of his feet, and his waist in the air, but all of them, without exception, grazed past his body by only a few millimeters. The air was torn apart by the tentacles. The roaring wind slipped past the Star Killer body. During that second, the completely unscathed Nicholas swung the severing soul's blade out of thin air with a calm gaze. The blade's trajectory and arcs that were formed when Nicholas swung the blade connected to form countless ovals in the air as Nicholas descended to the ground. Thud. Nicholas landed on the ground firmly and securely. Behind him were plenty of severed tentacles, and all of them were reduced to ashes. Nicholas stood up, and without even batting an eyelid, he sent the severing soul's blade straight into the big tentacle in front of him. Very soon, that limb belonging to Kilika disappeared from the world. Compared to handling weapons from all directions on the battlefield, this was much easier, Nicholas thought to himself. After all, I only have to handle one enemy. The entire way there since he broke into the place from the edge of Shield District, the worry in his heart did not diminish but only increased. The enemies he faced grew more densely packed, and the Hydra's body grew bigger. Clearly, he was getting closer to Gleeward. Hopefully, he was fine. As one of the few supreme-class warriors born from fighting through his way through corpses on the battlefield, Drew Gleeward possessed unyielding will, rich experiences, and a firm resolve, which matched his consummate fighting skills. These sort of warriors seemed as if they were born to exist in large-scale battles. It did not matter if it were smooth battles, adversities, advantages, or hopeless situations. All of them could create inconceivable miracles. When he thought of that person, Nicholas could not help but frown. Just like the kingdom's wrath in the south. This was also why no matter how bad Gleeward's temper was and how bad his relationship with the officials in Dragon Cloud City was, he was still chosen as the wielder of the Soul Slayer pike a decade ago, despite the fact he swore the first time he took the pike and cursed at King Nuvan, the previous Waltons who served as archdukes, and all their parents. Of course, it was precisely because of his bad temper that the retired heavy swordsman, Gleeward, did not have his name attached to any title from then on, whether it was titles of nobility, government official titles, or even among the 5 war generals. Instead, he became an infamous leader in Shield District as well as Hammer District. The Hydra was just right ahead. Nicholas gritted his teeth. Nicholas moved forward swiftly without stopping before new monsters and tentacles moved in front of him again. He circumnavigated a wreckage that looked like a collapsed mill, and he was stunned. He saw Gleeward. The person was not overpowered to the point where he absolutely could not fight back, which was what he imagined, neither was he on the ground, which was the worst-case scenario he imagined. Gleeward stood in perfect condition in front of him with his back facing Nicholas. The Soul Slayer pike was still lying in his hand, and the tremors on the tip of the pike did not stop. What truly shocked Nicholas was not Gleeward, but the area around him. There were numerous corpses behind Gleeward. Adults, children, the elderly, men, women. Most of them were dressed in rags and had serene smiles on their faces, but their faces were black. Just like air-dried wooden blocks. Nicholas stared at the dead scattered all over the ground with a sullen expression on his face. He had seen this manner of death before. That was after someone was struck with the effect of elimination. But Nicholas stared at Gleeward in disbelief. "Gleeward," Nicholas shouted. A light shudder ran through Gleeward's body, and he slowly turned around. Nicholas gripped the soul-severing blade in his hand tightly. Gleeward did not even notice him appearing behind him. This was something that he would have never imagined in the past. There's something off about his mental state right now. The Star Killer thought to himself. The lame, former heavy swordsman turned around while shuddering and stared at the Star Killer. Nicholas was shocked to discover that Gleeward's face was covered in tears. It's you. Gleeward bit his lip, and another trail of tears flowed down his cheeks. He spoke in a hoarse and frail voice, Walton's white blade lapdog. When he heard that familiar and rude name, Nicholas felt slightly at ease in his heart. However, he still stared at the corpses all over the ground and asked in puzzlement, what happened? These people. What happened? Gleeward shuddered, his pitch rose swiftly. What happened? Gleeward gritted his teeth and shut his eyes in anguish and great pain. Haven't you already seen it? Nicholas walked over and stood beside Gleeward to face that maiden in front of him. That was a maiden with blood-red spots all over her face and who had a gentle, charming smile on her face. Oh, the blood mystic chuckled, another one of you came. Bewilderment appeared on Nicholas's thin and pale face. No matter, Giza shook her head, and there was a relaxed look in her eyes that showed she was completely unbothered. I have enough reserves anyway, Tilda. During the instant, the mystic gently caressed Kilika behind her. The hydra shuddered again and released 2 gigantic tentacles. The tentacles continued trembling on the ground before they slowly split apart to open 2 mouths that were vertically several adult men's height. Nicholas's pupils shrank. Right before his eyes, 1, 2, 3, dozens of people slowly walked out of those 2 mouths. Walking straight towards them was an old woman with a face filled with the marks left behind by the vicissitudes of life. She first appeared puzzled, then lost, and then, with a face filled with fear, she stared at her entire body. The dozens of people consisted of people of varying ages, of men and women, and of the elderly and the young. All of them were initially confused before they were filled with shock. Then, all of them walked towards Gleeward at the same time. Nicholas whipped his head around and stared at Gleeward. Could it be? Gleeward shook his head with great difficulty. His eyes were filled with tears of grief, indignation, and misery. Gleeward, the old woman leading the group, widened her fear-filled eyes. She seemed to know Gleeward. My good boy, what's going on? I remember that. Ah, the old man lowered his head in shock and stared at her shriveled, thin legs moving bit by bit to bring her body forward. Why can I stand up now? My legs are better now. Granny Duval. Gleeward stared at the old woman and shut his eyes in grief before he stuck the pike on the ground. Bastard. No, the old woman seemed to have realized something and in a panic, said, I can't move my body. Why am I walking? Granny Duval was not the only one who reacted this way. Almost every single person among the dozens of people reacted this way. Once panic, fear, and shock surfaced in the people. What's going on? My hand. Arg, don't walk so quickly, I'm already too old, I'll fall. Oh God, look, it's a monster, it's the monster we saw before we fainted. But the crowd continued moving forward. During that instant, the stunned Nicholas seemed to have understood something. They can't help themselves, tears fell from Gleeward's shut eyes again. His words were disjointed. These citizens in Shield District, have been eaten by that monster, that whore, and after that, I have no idea what she did. But now she controls their bodies. Nicholas stared at the crowd, who were taking one step after another towards them with a disbelieving gaze. He watched them as they continued to create noise, question, argue, and even cry, shout, and roar. Just as the most ordinary citizen in Shield District would react. Oh my, I didn't eat them. They're all completely unscathed and independent, singular entities. The blood mystic sighed, each of them is a single, living being. Nicholas stared at the corpses next to Gleeward and completely understood what happened. He took a step forward, and he subconsciously moved his hand due to his anger. The Soul Slayer pike. Gleeward swallowed with great ardor and shook his head in pain. It's different compared to the other tentacle monsters, the lame man with the single ear forced down his grief. Elimination alone can't hurt her directly, the only thing it killed are these people's real bodies. The blood mystic smiled like a flower. That's right. Didn't you say that you were protecting this district? At that moment, the devilish maiden smiled. The blood-red spots on her face were especially bizarre and frightening. Then let me see your resolve. I have thousands of people here with me. The terrified people increased their speed and blocked the path between the 2 supreme-class elites and the mystic. Arg! Gleeward roared in anger. Nicholas took a deep breath and calmed down. They are only normal citizens. Perhaps if we push forward non-stop and break through them without any regard for the costs, we'll take down that monster. Under the Star Killer gaze, Gleeward still shook his head with great difficulty. Nicholas frowned. He suddenly noticed that there were quite a number of wounds on Gleeward's entire body. The mystic answered his question. Normal citizens. Giza chuckled softly. That's incorrect. The blood mystic tilted her head to the side, swiped her finger across her lips, and smiled coquettishly. They are thousands of flesh puppets with clear trains of thought and clear minds. They can even speak on their own. They do not fear death or pain. They will not retreat, will not stop, and will march forward without holding back, without any hesitation. Once she finished speaking, Granny Duval suddenly screamed in fear while she was at the forefront of the group. During the next moment, the old woman suddenly bent her body and went down on all fours. The crowd behind her instantly went into an uproar. As she let out a cry of surprise, Granny Duval started moving her hands and feet together, just like a feline, and with a nimbleness and speed that did not match her age and body, she leapt across 10-something meters in a few seconds, and as if she was hunting her prey, she pounced on Gleeward. No, Gleeward cried out in anguish. He turned the tip of the pike around and slammed the body of the pike on Granny Duval. As Granny Duval screamed in pain, she fell down hard on a wreckage. Bang! The old woman's bones seemed to be very frail. With just that one fall, Granny Duval's left arm had already become bent out of shape. Nicholas widened his eyes in anger and watched Granny Duval cry out in pain while using her broken left hand to push herself up before pouncing on Gleeward again. The old woman's pained screams echoed in Nicholas's ears. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry." Gleeward lifted his head swiftly and roared in anger. "Ah!" This time, Gleeward widened his eyes in anger, and as his tears spilled from his eyes, he brought the tip of the pike forward while he shivered. Rip! And with thrust, he pierced through Granny Duval. "Gleeward, my boy." Granny Duval's face was filled with disbelief. Then, Granny Duval's face started to blacken. All her life flowed away from her body and she fell down slowly. The crowd erupted collectively in panicked howls. Gleeward gritted his teeth and panted non-stop. "Hiya, these people aren't as useful as my cuties." The blood mystic covered her mouth and chuckled. The blood-red spots on her face started to sway like reeds in the wind. "Of course, when you're against them, you too, become much weaker, you pitiful human." Nicholas stared at everything before him with a dazed look. Gleeward's eyes were bloodshot. He bit down fiercely on his bottom lip, and when his entire body trembled, he pulled the tip of the pike out of the old woman's body. "They won't stop." The lame man tightened his grip on the pike, as if he was about to leave his palm print on it. "No matter how I injure them or hurt them, they will only climb up again." This was his shield district. "They will rush towards me in waves." These were the people he should be protecting. "They will stop me, and they will kill me." These were defenseless, innocent citizens. Unless. Gleeward roared with tears streaming down his face. He swung his arms and lifted the pike. "I kill." The crowd drew closer. The panicked, terrified, trembling, and incomparably familiar faces appeared right before his eyes. "I kill them." The almost broken Gleeward looked like a trapped beast that had been forced to a corner, and he roared in anger, grief, as well as despair. "Unless I kill them, damn it." Nicholas watched the waves of people pressing in on them, then at the countless corpses that laid down beside Gleeward. He only felt a cold chill creeping up the bottom of his heart. The blood mystic clicked her tongue. "Tisk tisk, the soul slayer pike, Unprecedented anger shot up in her eyes. "I know more than you do about that toy's might. In Reikaru's hands, the power executed from that thing is much greater than an amateur like you. But I'm still standing here in one piece." The blood mystic brought her hands up. There was a smile on her face, but her words were cold. "Try to guess what it means." The mystic grinned, then threw her head back and laughed. "Very good." While under that bizarre excitement of hers, Giza began thinking quickly. "I should be able to buy quite a considerable amount of time by doing so. It'll be enough for me to look for that boy. I'll find him, then kill him. I will save him." As she continued thinking, Kilika extended more tentacles from the bottom of the ground. 2 feverish dashes of red appeared on Nicholas's pale face. He uttered slowly and with great difficulty. "Then does it mean that you've thought about how to deal with the Soul Slayer pike right from the start? Right from the moment you absorbed your food reserves?" The blood mystic smiled brightly. Gleeward could not stop his shivers. He lifted his head and watched the crowd gradually draw closer to him. He stared at their expressions, and his eyes were filled with a numb look as well as resolve. Nicholas stared at their non-human opponent, and his heart grew heavier with each passing moment. "What should we do? Are we supposed to kill all of these still living citizens from Shield District? Kill these thousands and even tens upon thousands of people, and only then be able to fight against her? How could this be?" The Star Killer took a deep breath and shook his head slowly. "The legend of the White Blade Guards mentioned the Soul Slayer pike and also left behind records about you as well as the Hydra, but why wasn't this scene recorded?" "Well, I'm not very certain about that either." The blood mystic let out a breath of hot air. Her smile did not fade away. "But I can guess some of the reasons." Nicholas and Gleeward frowned together. "Did you know that the Soul Slayer pike's ability was originally known as life extermination?" The blood mystic smiled faintly. "But later on, it had its name changed to elimination." Gleeward shivered. Giza chuckled softly. She raised her head and stared at statue of the hero on the cliff of the sky. He held a pike in his hands, as he gazed at the land. He, the man who had unswerving determination, courage, sympathy, tolerance, and greatness gathered on himself. "In the beginning, Reikaru had a blood heir," the blood mystic faintly said. "His son, his younger brother, his nephew, his uncle. They formed the ever-loving Extit family." Nicholas and Gleeward stared at each other, and their eyes were filled with shock. "Until we ran into each other in the battlefield." The blood mystic narrowed her eyes, and her eyelashes fluttered lightly. That so-called humanities hero of yours, that merciless, callous, brutal, frightening, cold-hearted man, Rikaru Extit. They watched the terrifying and brutal blood calamity gently lift her slender fingers, and slowly pointed at the advancing crowd. He personally lifted the Soul Slayer pike. Giza's eyes shone with a strange but subtle red light. She parted her rosy lips slightly to speak of a secret that caused their skins to crawl. And killed them all, slayed them all without sparing even a single one of them. Chapter 175 Same Kind 1. Thales stared at the red smallsword in his hands dispiritedly. He was completely out of it even as a trembling little rascal moved in front of him and strenuously pulled him up. The blade of purification. Is this what it's called? The blade of the sword was blood red. Its color was incomparably vivid even under the dusky moonlight. Thales laboriously cleared the thoughts in his head, to the extent where he forgot about his surroundings. Is this sword a living thing? If it is, why didn't it activate in Black Sword's hand previously? If it isn't, what exactly was that voice? It seemed like it came from my ear. No, it was more like it came from the bottom of my heart. Why was it so similar to the encounter with the High Priestess of Bright Moon Temple when she was praying? When he touched it, the burning sensation that seeped into his body reminded him of the time when the mystic energy went out of control. How were they related? Also, it said, my blood brother. What does that mean? It even said, it's been a while. Had he met this toy, this legendary anti-mystic weapon before? More and more questions popped up in his head, but none of them could be resolved. It only caused him confusion and puzzlement. What have you done? Black Sword's voice rang in his ear. It was grave and severe. Thales jumped up with surprise. He came to his senses and unconsciously relaxed his grip. Clang. The red smallsword fell to the ground. With his weak body, Black Sword struggled as he lifted his torso. Thales was not certain if it was due to his stunned state or his injuries, but Black Sword did not look well. His sharp eyes were locked on Thales' face. Why has it suddenly become functional? Thales recomposed himself and stared at the smallsword on the ground. He took a deep breath and looked up to meet Black Sword's gaze. About that, the second prince managed an awkward smile. I don't know. Black Sword pinched his brows tighter together. Little rascal on the other hand, let out a Quick, look. The girl pointed at the floor. Her voice was laced with surprise. It turned back again. Black Sword and Thales were stunned as their eyes were once again attracted to the smallsword on the ground. The smallsword, which once glimmered with red rays in Thales' hands, began to gradually change in color. The blade, vivid as blood, began to fade and grow dim again. It transformed into its previous dull and dark shade of matte red, as if all of its blood had been removed. Thales blinked his eyes in shock. He was not the only one who reacted this way. The legendary assassin of Black Street Brotherhood shuddered as he shook his head. He looked perplexed. What on earth? If Ramon was still alive, Black Sword stared at the dull smallsword, looked down and gritted his teeth. His eyes were filled with discontentment. At this moment, the loud sound of an explosion came from afar. Boom. Before everyone could react, an old house nearby suddenly turned into dust. A shocking giant blood tentacle rocketed to the sky. In the distance, the Hydra's figure was faintly discernible behind the smog. Both Thales and Little Rascal were startled. They watched in astonishment as the tentacle split into innumerable tiny limbs. Like a dense, squirming nest of snakes, they started to rapidly hurtle over in droves. Black Sword reacted extremely quickly. He rolled to Thales, sighed and quickly picked up the red smallsword on the ground. What are you waiting for? Black Sword bellowed in an imposing manner, run. Thales quivered. Allowing no explanation, he simply pulled the pale little rascal up. With no regard for everything that had just happened, he kept his head down as he bolted in the opposite direction of the tentacles. These tentacles again. So, Asda really lost. Thales gritted his teeth. Aren't mystics supposed to be immortal and indestructible? Then, how could he have lost? Damn it. I have to keep running. As for Black Sword, he's still at the back, and he still has that blade of purification. Let's wish him good luck in killing those monsters. However, the tentacles seemed particularly swift and powerful this time. They surged through the corpse-strewn streets. Everywhere they went, they emitted a terrifying squishing sound. Upon hearing it, Thales felt a tingling chill in his scalp. He could feel the souls of the deceased rising. Without Asda's protection and without him defending them this time, the first tentacle caught up to them just as they were 4 to 5 steps into their sprint. This time, their only target was Thales. In that instant, Thales felt a weight under his foot. His ankle was caught firmly by that first tentacle. Thales felt a chill in his heart. How can this be? Black Sword is wielding that sword, yet he is unable to destroy or even hold them back. Thud. He staggered and fell onto the ground. The tentacle began to coil around him and drag him backwards. No, Little Rascal exclaimed. She turned around and relentlessly yanked Thales' arm in an attempt to free him from the tentacle's entanglement. But how could the strength of 2 children help them wrestle free from the Hydra's tentacles? They were dragged together towards the snake-like mass of tentacles. Damn it! Thales' head became numb as he watched the constriction around his ankle become tighter. He took a glimpse of the other approaching tentacles behind them. In a short few seconds, they had already arrived before his eyes. He could now clearly discern the mangled limbs amid the tentacles, and they were all either melted or were broken. Thales shuddered as he hurriedly turned around to yell, "Quick, run!" Little Rascal bit her lower lip instead, firmly clinging on to his arm. She shook her head in desperation. They had been dragged a few meters along the way by now. Squish! The terrifying sound of the grinding of flesh came from everywhere, near and far. Thales continued to feel a chill in his heart. This is bad. We're not going to make it. Soon, countless tentacles enveloped the skies and the moon. Like turbulent waves, they surged boundlessly in their direction. The first tentacle coiled around Little Rascal's left arm. The second covered Thales' back. The third, fourth, fifth. The tentacles bound him and Little Rascal firmly, all the way from their limbs to their bodies. No. The sticky, warm yet nausea-inducing tentacles of mangled limbs masked Thales' eyes as he bellowed with rage. They concealed his vision of Little Rascal, whose face was streaming with tears. Little Rascal screamed as her grip on Thales was released in the tussle. Thales' eyes looked as if they were about to pop out of their eye sockets as he watched Little Rascal's sorrowful face being obstructed by the tentacles. Then, she disappeared before his eyes. No, no. In the midst of his full-body tussle with the tentacles, Thales desperately reached for the JC dagger. At this point between life and death, he did not care about any secrets or side effects anymore. He had to utilize mystic energy. Well, it was either that or what he thought was mystic energy. Just as the second prince was about to grab hold of the dagger to stab himself, another tentacle came from behind and bound his right arm. Then, it began to drag his arm backwards. He did not manage to touch the dagger. Thales gritted his teeth. No. He was like the captured prey of a spider, securely trapped in a web, unable to move. He could only close his eyes and await death. But right at this moment, Black Sword's long-overdue roar suddenly rang in his ear. Ah! Immediately after, the sound of flesh rupturing resounded one after another. Crash! Thales shuddered as he felt the momentum of the dragging come to a halt all of a sudden. The next moment, the tentacles around his head suddenly let go. Blood droplets splattered everywhere and the scarred Black Sword appeared in Thales' field of view. Thales felt his spirits lift. Before he could speak, Black Sword bellowed as he brandished the red smallsword amid the rampaging tentacles. Swoosh! In the middle of the violent and shrill wind, pieces of flesh were strewn in all directions as the blade carved circular arcs into the tentacles' flesh. It severed and slashed off tentacle after tentacle. The tentacles trembled at once and like a rampaging bull, they frantically attacked Black Sword. With a body riddled with scars and bruises, Black Sword presented a swiftness that did not seem to be possible with his physical condition. His body sometimes trembled as he broke away from the entanglement. Occasionally, he swiftly dodged attacks and fought assiduously against the tentacles, which came from all directions. Black Sword brushed off a tentacle reaching for his left shoulder. As his right arm trembled, he shook off another tentacle that settled on it. Then, he roared in fury as he chopped off a tentacle constricting Thales' left leg. Black Sword had an unpleasant expression on his face. He stood among the tentacles, which were everywhere around him. His legs had unknowingly been entangled for quite a while. Still, he was unaware. He never stopped brandishing the smallsword in his hands. At times, he cut off tentacles coiling around Thales, while other times, he sliced those tentacles that attempted to obstruct him. Within the innumerable mass of tentacles, Black Sword stood before Thales. His eyes were filled with unswerving determination as his figure shuffled around swiftly. At that moment, he was like an unsettled bug that had fallen into a spider's web, desperately struggling and trembling with an unyielding tenacity. Thales watched the entire scene in a daze. "Hang on to me," Black Sword roared. He stretched out his thickly bandaged, blood-stained left arm and firmly clenched Thales' shoulder. With a wave of the smallsword, he instantly sliced off 3 tentacles that were coiled around Thales. GWUF. Black Sword had a ferocious expression on his face. Like picking a carrot, he forcibly yanked Thales out of the mass of tentacles. Coughing uncontrollably, Thales desperately clung on to Black Sword's arm. With a powerful swing, Black Sword hurled Thales out of the tentacles' range. Thales rolled across the ground, gasping for breath. Several tentacles attempted to chase after Thales, but they were mercilessly chopped off by Black Sword. As for Black Sword himself, he was instead getting tightly entwined by the tentacles. Thales could care less about gasping for breath right then. He whipped his head around, but only saw Black Sword almost being completely covered by the tentacles. Once he allowed his power of eradication to let out another burst of energy from his body, and saved Thales, he began to struggle among the tentacles with great difficulty. Thales instinctively wanted to crawl back, but when he lifted his head and saw Black Sword's gaze, he could not help but force his feet to stop. The man was still fighting non-stop among the tentacles. Why is this smallsword so useless? Black Sword glared at the red smallsword in his hand and roared in anger. These things aren't disappearing. Thales only felt physically and mentally exhausted after escaping death. He pushed himself off the floor and listened to the slick sounds the tentacles were making behind him. In his mind, he saw little rascal's helpless expression when she was dragged off in the end, and he could only feel unbearable resentment in his heart. How can this be? He gritted his teeth. Then, without even thinking, he shouted back at the top of his lungs, how would I bloody know? When I was holding it, it was still. Right when he said these words, both of them shuddered at the same time. Thales understood something. One of the tentacles seized the chance to wrap itself around Black Sword's neck, then strangle him until he convulsed. It was a moment of crisis. Black Sword was no longer swinging his smallsword. He, who was almost covered entirely by tentacles, cast Thales a profound glance. Boy, Black Sword swiftly raised his voice. Thales panted and stood up after exerting great effort. Several tentacles had already moved past Black Sword and arrived before Thales. Yet at the very next moment, Thales saw Black Sword's arm move. Then the sound of wind blowing rose into the air. A black shadow pounced on the prince's face while it spun. Thales instinctively closed his eyes. He could not help but raise his right hand to protect his head. However, that black shadow made a perfect circle around him before it accurately landed into Thales' lifted right palm. The Prince of Constellation instinctively wrapped his fingers around it, and he immediately felt its heavy weight. Thales bent his knees. He fumbled about to hold the smallsword that Black Sword had thrown to him, even though the hilt had landed right into his palm. Although he did not want to admit it, Black Sword had an accurate aim. Thales took a deep breath. Black Sword cast Thales a final glance before he was completely covered by the tentacles. The tentacle that enveloped Black Sword lifted its prey and tumbled back. Thales breathed in a daze, but he knew what he had to do. Please. He gritted his teeth and brandished the smallsword. With wreckage and snow beneath his feet, he charged forward. Hurry up, and activate. Ah. The next moment, Thales roared with all his strength, as though doing this would help him relax. Then, he swung the smallsword at the incoming tentacles. One tentacle touched Thales' face, causing him to feel a numb sensation on his face. Another tentacle stretched towards his hands and made unpleasant sloshing sounds. However, immediately after, a strange feeling surged into his heart once more, and his blood vessels started to rage non-stop. Thales' smallsword transformed. It was as if some form of power had been injected into it. The dull, still, lusterless, red tip of the sword started to change color and it glowed right after Thales held the hilt. It became a bright shade of blood red, looking like it had gained life once more, just as it previously did. Red light expanded into the air and the two tentacles closest to Thales instantly shuddered before the tip of the smallsword. In just a few seconds, their warm and powerful physical bodies withered and shriveled into gray limbs. Sizzling sounds of roasting fire rose into the air, and red vapor appeared from them as they were reduced to ashes. They were burnt alive. Thales' heart shuddered. It's effective. He did not stop, instead he rushed forward in a manic manner. Not too far away, while still fighting against Gleeward and Nicholas, the blood mystic turned her head sideways as if she was deep in thought. She peered in Thales' direction. Giza's tentacles did indeed leave others with a deep impression. Once he came into contact with the warm texture as well as the sticky and slimy feeling, Thales knew that he did not want to feel it again for the rest of his life. It was way too disgusting. This time, Thales simply lowered his head, raised his smallsword and rushed forward desperately. Yet surprisingly, Thales did not run into any physical obstructions during the few seconds of his charge. This was despite the fact that the swarm of tentacles had previously looked so incredibly terrifying. Thales kept his gaze fixed on the floor and did not let any of the surging tentacles in front of him affect his gaze. He simply ran forward without stopping. He rammed into the swarm of tentacles that enveloped Black Sword without any form or grace. The wall of flesh formed by the tentacles crumbled right when he touched them. Ashes fell ceaselessly around him. If there was any part of his body that was wrapped by those tentacles, Thales would instinctively direct the tip of the sword towards it. In just a few seconds, the tentacles would slightly shudder before they released their grip on him and turn into ashes. Just like the ripples on a lake, the tentacles would move back and spread out as they trembled before him. With a speed faster than before, they retreated back to their base. However, Thales was still not bothered about anything else. He only charged forward single-mindedly, raising his sword. At the next second, he felt his feet landing on empty air. Thales panicked and he started to plunge towards the ground. But he did not crash. Thud. A muffled sound rose into the air. Pain blossomed in Thales' head. He felt as if he had crashed into a thick wall. Nonetheless, something had caught him in the nick of time. Enough. Black Sword's cold and aloof voice rang next to his ears. Thales shuddered. Only then did he raise his head. Black Sword's expression was sour after being freed from his predicament. He held Thales' wrist in a tight grip, stopping the red smallsword from cutting into his neck. That's enough, Black Sword said coldly. Then, he released Thales' arm along with the smallsword. Only then did the badly shaken Thales recover his breathing. He, who had just survived a disaster, looked around him only to find the tentacles retreating in defeat. They fell back in a scattered manner, they lay motionless on the ground, and they withered, or just disappeared into the darkness. It was as if everything they went through earlier had not happened. But one person was missing. Thales ran 2 steps forward in a daze. All that entered his field of vision were corpses sprawled all over the ground, or withered tentacles. Nothing else could be found. It's too late. Black Sword stared into the distant darkness with a sharp gaze. His voice was slightly weak. You can't catch up anymore. Thales' heart shuddered. He gripped the red smallsword tightly, and collapsed on the floor, feeling powerless. He bit his bottom lip. Then, he accidentally pressed down on something with his left hand. It was something hard. Thales lowered his head, and shuddered. Those were Little Rascal's glasses. Those glasses with the black frames, which did not fit her. One of the lenses was already scratched. But its owner. Thales could not help but feel pain in his heart. Little Rascal. He dragged her away from King Nuvan, from Asda, and from Giza's tentacles. But in the end, she still. When he thought of that, Thales could only feel his throat tightening. It felt like a large rock was pressing down on his heart. No. Thales picked up the battered glasses and bit down hard on his bottom lip. Yet, he could not help replaying the moment in his head, the moment when Little Rascal hugged his arm tightly before she was submerged by the tentacles, then subsequently dragged away as she screamed. No. Black Sword held his chest and sat down, swaying a little. He spat a mouthful of blood on the ground, and once he regulated his breathing, he lifted his head. Thales shut his eyes tightly before he lowered his head. When he saw Thales in such a state, Black Sword sighed deeply. I knew it, you did do something. Black Sword stared at the withered, blackened tentacles, which had scattered into ashes before he spoke languidly. The smallsword will only react to your touch. It looks like its ability to restrain mystics will only be activated in your hands. Still drowning in indescribable sorrow, Thales shuddered lightly. Thales swept his dull and unfocused eyes across the bright red weapon in his hand. Do you have any explanations for this? Black Sword shook his head as he stilled his expressions and asked flatly. Thales frowned. He stared at Black Sword, and had no idea if he was looking at him in anger or annoyance. He's still wondering about this. Thales fell silent. He only spoke after a long moment had passed. Explanations. Thales laughed coldly in great sorrow. Explain my foot. Black Sword did not pay any heed to his words. He only stared at Thales' face. Several seconds later, Black Sword suddenly spoke. Azure ambition. Thales answered him absent-mindedly. What? What connection do you have with that place? Black Sword asked seriously. At that moment, Thales only felt resentment filling his chest. He did not show any desire to acknowledge what Black Sword had said. He then retorted coldly, there's no blasted connection between us. Thales lowered his head and gritted his teeth. He closed his eyes and tried his best not to look at the corpses that were sprawled all over the ground on both sides of the street. Attacked by the tentacles, they had become disfigured beyond recognition. Black Sword did not answer. He only turned sideways and frowned as he stared into the distant darkness. After a moment, Black Sword's voice turned even colder. Don't you realize, she ended up this way because of you? Thales lifted his head, shivering. With glistening eyes due to his tears, he looked at Black Sword. All of the people here, including Ramon, millions of them, died because of you. You should know this very well, Black Sword said with no intention to be tactful to Thales. How does it feel? Thales breathed in a daze. His eyes were dull and unfocused. This is the calamity that those monsters have brought on us, Black Sword said flatly. 12 years ago, I saw a similar tragedy. Corpses sprawled everywhere, countless wreckages, companions snatched away from me, and innocents dragged into this mess. Those monsters' total lack of concern and their hateful gazes made it all seem as though no one could enter their sights. To those monsters, we are only insects who can think and talk. Compared to their goal, even if it's an incredibly absurd and ludicrous goal, we are nothing. Thales gritted his teeth and narrowed his eyes. What are you hinting at? The mystics destroyed the entire city. You and I, we have to take responsibility. Black Sword heaved a long sigh as if the wounds on his body had become much better. So, we have to do something, for that girl who was beside you, right? Thales tightened his grip around the black-framed glasses and regulated his breathing. You need my help, Thales said with certainty. Black Sword nodded slowly. This sword will only be effective in your hands. Black Sword stared into Thales' eyes. Since we have this weapon, we must do something. So yes, I need your help, Black Sword repeated his words. What do you want to do? Thales' breathing became ragged again. His voice sounded a little lifeless. This time, Black Sword stared at him for a long time before he opened his mouth slowly to speak. Look around us, look at the wreckage they've left behind. Black Sword stood up from the ground in a faltering manner. He cast his gaze into the distance. That thing is still wreaking havoc even at this moment. I believe that Dragon Cloud City can no longer control the situation. Thales shuddered. He finally registered what Black Sword was trying to say. You want to? Thales was slightly surprised. He turned his head and directed his sight in the direction of Black Sword's gaze, the direction where Kilika had left. You want to look for the Blood Mystic? Black Sword nodded. We want to end everything, put an end to the nightmare in the city. If we're lucky, we can even save that girl, if she still hasn't been eaten by that thing, that is. Thales' breathing gradually quickened. Black Sword continued with a profound tone in his voice, if we don't, as long as you're still here and as long as that thing is still here, you and all of the unfortunate people beside you will never know peace. Even if you save that girl, she will end up in the monster's hands again, even if you have that sword with you. Thales frowned, then he looked at the small sword in his hand. Several seconds later, he mumbled softly, Blade of Purification. What? Black Sword frowned. The sword's name is the Blade of Purification. Thales stared at the sword in his hand and at its blood-red tip. A look of resolution appeared briefly in his eyes. Black Sword stared at him, and suddenly started laughing. I knew it, you do know something. Not any more than you, Thales said emotionlessly with dull, lifeless eyes. Black Sword did not continue with the topic at hand. He simply stared at the young prince with a pressing gaze. So, boy, as the youngest wielder of a legendary anti-mystic equipment in history, what's your decision? Thales took a deep breath. He stared at the Blade of Purification in his hand. The only thing he could hear right then were the moaning, freezing wind as well as the sloshing sounds from the Hydra. Before his eyes, Asda's profound gaze appeared, as well as Giza's charming, gentle smile, along with Little Rascal's tearful expression. The screams of the Northlanders as they ran for their lives rang in his ears. At that instant, Thales' expression became filled with determination. All right, I'll go with you. But before he managed to finish speaking, Black Sword suddenly spoke, one word of advice. Thales was momentarily stunned. Using the legendary anti-mystic equipment too much will create a huge burden on the body, Black Sword stated flatly. If you can't control its power, it'll be dangerous for you. Hearing this, Thales was stunned before he lowered his head to scrutinize the Blade of Purification in his hands again. Under the moonlight, the blood-red tip looked incredibly brilliant and dazzling. Dangerous? He asked, befuddled. It's especially so for those who aren't in supreme class. Those who aren't won't be able to have absolute control over the legendary anti-mystic equipment. Black Sword's voice continued to rise into the air. As for you, you'll have to think about it properly. Black Sword's voice was incomparably callous. Thales furrowed his brows tightly. That instant, he suddenly thought of Gilbert and Yodel, as well as Gines. He remembered their gazes, even though he had never seen Yodel's eyes before. He remembered Gilbert telling him that when he ran into calamities, he had to protect himself. But he also remembered his own status. Isn't the price for using my mystic energy every single time also very devastating? And, he remembered Giza's smile, and her gentle but determined gaze. She would not let him go. You were just trying to persuade me to go to the mystic with you. Thales laughed coldly, but you're saying these words right now. And what is your answer? Black Sword raised his brows slightly. Thales' gaze gradually focused. He lifted his head and looked straight into Black Sword's piercing eyes. He nodded heavily. Let's go, Thales said flatly. Let's go meet that cute, big sister, and test our luck. Chapter 176 Same Kind 2. Black Sword scrutinized Thales' face for the longest time. Not bad. Finally, Black Sword slowly nodded. A smile unlike his usual one was revealed at the corner of his mouth. You are indeed a Jadastar. Jadastar. At that moment, Thales felt alarmed as his eyes widened. You. He involuntarily tightened his grasp on the Blade of Purification. Ah, at this point, if I can't even get your identity right, what else is there to discuss about finding the mystic? Black Sword shook his head with a vague smile. Prince Thales. The next moment, Black Sword firmly picked Thales up with his right arm. Grab hold of your sword, Black Sword said coldly as he swiftly jumped onto a half-collapsed roof and leapt in Kilika's direction. Stunned, Thales felt the whooshing of the wind in his ear. He now knew his identity. Thales could not help but recall King Nuvan and Asda's words. The mercenary leader was peculiarly skilled. Wielding a strange sword. Map of Renaissance Palace. You were the one who assassinated the Crown Prince, weren't you? Thales' heart thumped continuously. What was he going to do? He had reached the point of no return. An earth-shattering explosion was then heard from afar. Kilika was raging. What should we do? After a while, Thales finally came to his senses. He forcibly suppressed the tension and shock in his heart. Trembling, he asked, what's to be done? With his intact right arm, Black Sword held Thales in his embrace as his footsteps continued to thrust his weak body forward. The Blood Mystic, the second prince frowned. I've personally witnessed it. She cannot be sealed by legendary anti-mystic equipment. If there's no way to seal her, if we were to face her in battle with those incredibly strange abilities of hers. An uninhibited sense of worry surged in Thales' heart. Surely, there's a way, Blacksword said with certainty. There has never been an undefeatable enemy, a living creature like that only exists in novels of the knights. It's our lead. Huh, Thales was stunned. Do you have any solutions then? Blacksword turned his body nimbly, avoiding a tentacle that appeared out of nowhere. First of all, you need a change of mindset. Thales was a little surprised. Change of mindset? You think you're very weak, don't you? Blacksword lowered his head and allowed his voice to drift with the wind into Thales' ears. You think that your chances of winning will be very low when you face her, don't you? Thales opened his mouth. After gulping a mouthful of cold air, he trembled as he said, Isn't that true though? Thales hugged the blade of purification against his chest. Feeling dispirited, he said, I am very weak. In the face of such an opponent, let's not start with me, besides you, even the super-class fellows don't stand a chance. Upon hearing that, Blacksword sneered. I was far from finished with my words in front of Asda just now. Blacksword's words suddenly sounded a little grave. Listen well now. Blacksword halted, stopping in front of a low wall. Next to them were a pair of motionless lovers locked in an embrace. No, little one, Blacksword's tone was incomparably cold. The sound of a house collapsing came from afar. It seemed like an intense battle. With the austerity in Blacksword's expression, Thales suddenly felt an indescribable sense of nervousness in his heart. He heard him resolutely say, You're not weak at all. As he heard Blacksword's unquestionable tone this time, Thales was completely stunned. You think you have no power and can't take a blow, that you are at the disposal of anyone with the slightest capability. Blacksword lowered his voice. They hid behind the low wall, listening to the squishing sounds that were reverberating nearby. Then, why are you still standing here? Thales felt congested. I'm just lucky. Sometimes, I'm a bit clever. I am able to slip my way through situations every time. Blacksword narrowed his eyes into a thin line. The glaring light from within was unprecedentedly aggressive. A few seconds later, the leader of Blackstreet Brotherhood casually yet unquestionably said, Only true weaklings will treat pure force as evidence of strength. Thales' eyebrows twitched. To those who are truly strong, force is nothing more than a decoration. True strength does not lie in how heavy of a hatchet you can wield, how swiftly you can pierce with a sword, how wide you can pull a sturdy bow open, or how accurate you can slash with your blade. Looking at Thales' frown, Blacksword paused slightly. Without any expression on his face, he proceeded, It has nothing to do with how many thousands of soldiers you can lead or how strong of a city you can conquer either. I've seen a strong and acclaimed supreme-class warrior found dead in a beggar's sack without any dignity. I've also seen how an important suzerain fell into despair under a servant's axe. Blacksword's pupils contracted. The chill in his words had an aggressive edge to it. I've even seen an insufferably arrogant mystic lose and be frightened out of his wits of a sickly girl. Thales took a deep breath and raised his head. He furrowed his brows tightly as he softly said, The supreme-class warrior, the suzerain, even the mystic, their losses were all coincidences. Only under extremely rare conditions, paired with some impossibly bad luck, could they have had the chance of dying in the hands of the weak. However, as Thales spoke, his voice gradually grew fainter. While a little bewildered, he looked at Blacksword, who was shaking his head. You're right, the ordinary-looking man exhaled. Coincidence, conditions, luck, chance and more, all of these added together are crucial points in determining the strong and the weak, relative superiority, and the winner of a battle. Thales' eyes widened. He was still slightly startled. You mean? Blacksword raised the corner of his mouth as if he was looking at a mischievous student. Those who are truly strong see all the factors that determine the outcome of battle as his own strength. The squishing sound in his ear disappeared. At the next moment, Blacksword got up from the ground again. Thales squeezed his eyes shut as he felt the frost and snow billowing against his face. However, Blacksword's words were drilled into his ear. Not a word was missed. It all rang clear without mistake. Those who are truly strong will turn unfavorable conditions into conditions that will benefit them, disadvantages into advantages, a deadly situation into a chance for them to survive, and also reduce absolute outcomes into mere possible outcomes. They transform their opponent's force into weakness and magnify their own strength. In despair they seek hope, and from loss they find ways to turn the tide. They escalate favorable circumstances into sure wins and transform unexpected mishaps into support. Blacksword stepped over a fallen, dead man. The pain of suffocation remained on the face of the deceased. They turned around an alley which was missing half of its entrance. The sounds of battle ahead of them drew nearer. With the frosty wind blowing in his face, Thales endured the chill and strong gale. He could not help but say, but. Blacksword, however, did not allow him to interrupt and continued talking. They unfold their chessboard under the vast heavens and earth, using all living beings as chess pieces. They regard all things in the world as squares on a chessboard, turning seemingly simple confrontational battles into an unparalleled match that allows them to predict the outcome of a battle. Black Sword took a deep breath and raised his head towards the sky. They take everything their opponents rely upon as their possession. These are the people who see all factors including their opponents, themselves, their surrounding conditions, and luck as bargaining chips. People who seize everything in their grasp, take the world into account in their hearts and are capable of observing the entire situation. Black Sword dropped his head. Without realizing it, Thales found himself was dumbfounded by the deep meaning in Black Sword's eyes as he silently listened to him. Only these people are qualified to be called truly strong. The squishing sounds from Kilika were now clear and distinct. It was growing nearer. Silence fell between the two of them, and only the snow sweeping across their faces reminded them of their situation. Thales opened his mouth gradually. He gritted his teeth and hesitated before he finally spoke up. But due to the foul existence of those mystics, regardless of the crafty plots, or however many factors taken into consideration, Thales revealed a bitter smile, which made him look rather haggard. They would all only have limited effects. You are wrong again, Black Sword coldly said. With a sharp turn, Black Sword held Thales by his arms as he slid across a frozen trench. This move was a little sudden and abrupt, causing Thales to feel a spell of dizziness. Even those who seem to have unparalleled power, those who can destroy cities and countries with mere gestures, those who are unrivaled, are even immortals and indestructible creatures. After he said these words, Black Sword deliberately left his sentence hanging and scanned the circular perimeter of the ruins. But Thales could only squint and strenuously try to reduce the impact upon his sense of balance brought by Black Sword's stance. Black Sword slammed his left palm on the ground and leapt. Shortly after, he raised his head and snorted. If they can't do all the things I just mentioned, then they remain as weaklings, just stronger weaklings at best. The Hydra in the distance was close enough and clearly distinguishable by now. It didn't notice us. Thales was a little nervous. I have my ways. Unconcerned, Black Sword cast him a look. How did you think I escaped the hands of the blood mystic? They stopped again and Black Sword reached out to touch the ground, closing his eyes slightly. It seemed like he was feeling something. But he spoke again. Long story short, even if it were the calamities with their seemingly unstoppable power, for those who are truly strong, they are no more than slightly bigger chess pieces. Black Sword withdrew his hand from the ground and lightly tapped the blade of purification in Thales' hands. His eyes were filled with wisdom and intelligence. If for any reason, these big chess pieces are removed from their chessboard, these so-called, unrivaled, beings would become nothing. They would even become ridiculous and despicable existences. Thales looked pensive as he bowed his head. Black Sword inhaled. His eyes were unfocused and there was a profound look in his eyes, as if he had sunken into his memories of the past. His faintly discernible tone was then heard. Have you ever seen a supreme-class swordsman lose both his arms and cry his eyes out after waking up? Thales was stunned. Black Sword continued. Have you ever seen an elite scout, who travels thousands of miles in a day decline into blind drunkenness after completely shattering the bones in his legs? Have you ever seen a high official lose his authority and turn mad, passing his nights and days in insanity in the countryside? Have you ever seen a famous general go from berating thousands of soldiers to being convicted for a crime overnight, hoping for his demise in prison because he had already succumbed to grief? Have you ever seen a family who has enjoyed being aristocrats for thousands of years stripped of their family name and eventually giving up on their lives like the beggars in their worst state of despair? Have you ever seen a terrifying, formidable, and boundlessly powerful calamity shake like a leaf, fleeing in the face of a tiny legendary anti-mystic equipment? I've seen them all before, the man plainly said. Thales' breathing started to grow heavy. Ah, Thales exhaled lightly, revealing an exhausted smile. So you have the plot armor dependency syndrome. But I've seen more than just them. Black Sword did not understand what Thales just said, but took a deep breath as though he was focusing his energy. I've seen a prince who fell into the hands of his opponents over the course of one night. He had both of his legs broken and he was burdened with a bad reputation. After being reduced to a lowly slave, he overthrew his owner in 2 years. With a new army, he trekked thousands of miles and returned to his capital. He is a legend among his people. I have seen weak women who have been deprived completely of their power. Without an ounce of strength in their hands, they tumble like the wind among ill-intentioned enemies. But with their graceful posture, silver tongues and amazing eloquence, they become nightmares who murder without being seen and disassemble armies in an instant. Thales did not say a word. Meanwhile, Black Sword frowned slightly. He propped his palm on the ground in another direction. Black Sword's keen perception had returned to him, giving him priceless intel on the situation of the battlefield. Someone is confronting and contending with the blood mystic. There are 2 of them. Based on how things are going, it's very likely that they are individuals armed with legendary anti-mystic equipment. This is quite a good chance to strike. But it's still not the best time yet. We have to be patient. Those are what we call the truly powerful. Black Sword placed all his attention back to where he stood with Thales instead of diverting his attention to observe both places, as he did just now. He slowly nodded as if to confirm the safety of the path ahead. Those who exist free from the restriction of strength, power and status, wherever they go, they will be able to blossom in radiance. Even the tiniest ant can affect a supreme deity. Thales slowly frowned. Are you such a person? Black Sword fell silent. No, the man's tone was low. I can only be considered as one who's striving to be like them. But you, little fellow. You possess such potential. Black Sword turned around and his gaze swept across Thales' face like a blade. Your performance on the cliff astonished me. Thales' eyes widened. You had fewer chess pieces than everybody else, but you did your utmost to grab hold of anything and everything useful. You clung tightly onto every possible bargaining chip, cast the most crucial chip and from then on, changed the entire battle. Little fellow, based on those points solely, you are already, compared to the majority of the world, much stronger. Black Sword observed the scene in the distance. Kilika's body was already close to his sight. You are a strong person. Earlier, you were able to seek the opportunity to live and escape from such adversity. You stood firm. This is something most of the strongest so-called supreme classes cannot achieve, Black Sword whispered. Now, you just have to firmly believe this and have an unshaken resolve to be a truly strong person. Thales put on a doubtful look on his face. What we did on the cliff was your plan, the second prince argued. From the initial tests of strength masked as attacks to you seizing me to seek opportunities, I even had my doubts when you eventually accepted my suggestion. Throwing me off the cliff was also part of your plan. Don't forget, you had already prepared mountain climbing ropes from the start. The most crucial chip, and whatnot don't matter. Thales curled his lips. Stop comforting me. Black Sword's face stiffened. I'm doing this to encourage you. With an unpleasant expression, Black Sword coughed lightly. Also, don't change the subject. Thales revealed an embarrassed smile. And Black Sword sighed. The sound of a man's roar drifted into their ears from Kilika's direction. Thales was slightly hesitant. He wanted to stretch his neck to look at the scene outside, but he was brusquely tugged back by Black Sword. On the contrary, those who revere pure force and authority as the only determining factor of victory and categorize the strong and weak based on these, well, they've been outdated a long time ago. Strength is not feudal nobility. It can never be transformed into visible, numbered rankings. I've seen supreme classes die in the hands of the ordinary class. I've also seen unarmed, so-called, weaklings, destroy dozens of ranked, super-class warriors. The era of one-on-one duels between knights are long gone. Sadly, even in this era where bows can pierce through armor, horseshoes can squash flesh, trebuchets can break city walls, and mystic guns rumble, the vast majority of people's thoughts remain in the ridiculous era of the knights. They treat battle as a comical play of arm wrestling between two people on a table. Black Sword had half of his head extend out of the place they hid and observed the area outside. His eyes sparkled brilliantly. That pitiful, limited viewpoint of theirs is just restraining them their views of strength on arms, muscles, on two people fighting, and on a table used for arm wrestling. Black Sword looked deep into Thales' eyes and smiled with disdain. It is as you are now, how your eyes are locked on the inextricable myth of the mystics and their unparalleled power. What else is there? Thales countered with slight denial. This is not as simple as a big chess piece. This is a big chess piece, with the ability to smash the chessboard. Then, work harder. Black Sword coldly interrupted him. Let it smash the chessboard, smash it all the way into the ground. Thales was a little stunned. Are we having a squabble? Remember, as I see it, you're not a weakling. Black Sword dropped his head. His tone was very serious and scary. Never have doubts like, I'm not strong enough, that's exclusive to a weakling. How did the humans defeat the ancient orcs while they were in an absolutely disadvantageous situation? How did they win the battle of eradication? Black Sword's eyes released rays of unprecedented resolution. Is it not clear enough? Thales stared blankly into Black Sword's eyes, those resolute and cold, yet incomparably clear eyes. Northland military sword style. Thales opened his mouth without realizing. Black Sword's facial expression changed. What? I remember now, at the cliff of the sky just now, your movements as you rushed in Asda's direction, that was the Northland military sword style. Thales narrowed his eyes, the ancient orc resistance sword style. He quickly raised his head to look at Black Sword. Why are you telling me these things? Black Sword stared at him, slowly biting the corner of his mouth. He revealed an unpleasant smile. First of all, I will not carry someone who's a burden to me, Black Sword plainly said. Especially one with the potential to be strong, but is consumed by a weakling's mindset, a burden who only knows how to strive and test his luck during critical times. People like that are the worst. Thales' eyebrows twitched begrudgingly. He was feeling anxious in his heart. What exactly are we waiting for? Obviously, Kilika, and even Giza are already right before our eyes. But Black Sword still stubbornly finished what he was saying. Second of all, once you have a change of mindset to understand this reasoning, you can utilize all your chess pieces to their maximum efficiency. Thales' heart moved. He looked at Black Sword in confusion. Chess pieces? You mean this sword? Thales scratched his head and raised the blade of purification in his hands. Right. But that's not all. Black Sword slowly readjusted his breathing, and his eyes grew colder. You have a bizarre sword of power, don't you? At that moment, Thales felt like he had been struck by lightning. That can't be. Bizarre power. Don't tell me he's talking about my mystic energy. However, Black Sword's following words set off tidal waves in his already very much shocked heart. It's exactly the sort of power that allowed you to spot Asda's air wall, see through its essence, and speak up to warn me. Black Sword's words were like a heavy hammer that struck Thales' heart. It even allows you to see farther, run faster, have greater strength and sharper reflexes. Power. Thales stared blankly at Black Sword. It's not mystic energy. Wait a minute. Is it those fluctuations? How did he know? It's precisely with those powers that you could escape from the tentacles earlier, Black Sword coldly said. Thales' mouth hung wide open. Silence continued for a few seconds. Thales heard his heartbeat accelerate, and his blood rush. He could not help but frown. You mean to say, that power? That's a power of eradication. Black Sword resolved his suspicions. An extremely rare power of eradication. Sin of Hell's River. Thales' eyes were wide open, his pupils continuously shifting focus. Power of eradication. Hell's River. Hell's River. Black Sword took a deep breath, and knitted his brows, appearing a little dispirited. Although I don't know how you could possess it at such an age, without a doubt, this could be one of your most capable chess pieces. It can even determine the outcome of a battle. Sin of Hell's River. Thales finally came to his senses a good while later. He absent-mindedly said, "What kind of damned name is that?" "I never said it would have a pleasant-sounding name." Black Sword stared intently at his face, as if awaiting his face to bloom into a flower. "As long as it's effective, it's enough." Effective. Thales raised his head. He laboriously tried to rearrange his scattered thoughts. He recalled the scene when his fluctuations first surged in the birch tree forest. Then, he recalled the first time he noticed the weird fluctuations on Raymond's body. "I don't even know what it is." Thales frowned. "Do you?" Scattered rumbling came from behind the low wall. A few seconds later, Black Sword's ordinary-looking face appeared somewhat terrifying under the moonlight. At that moment, Thales vaguely noticed that Black Sword's expression was sort of lonesome and sorrowful. "I don't just know about it." Thales blinked. Amid the Hydra's increasingly louder squishing, Black Sword gently said, "We are the same kind. Slaves of that accursed power." Thales inhaled with surprise. "Same kind? Slaves? Wait a minute, that power." Nonetheless, Black Sword did not give him any chances to ask questions. The legendary leader of Black Street Brotherhood raised his head and looked at Kilika's terrifying body, which was growing stronger by the moment. With an indifferent and dull tone, he whispered, "Listen well. Before we undertake this final task, I will only teach you how to use the Sin of Hell's River once." Chapter 177 Sudden Entrance into the Battlefield. 6 o'clock in the morning, Dragon Cloud City, in the middle of Shield District. The moon had set and the darkest moment of the day was upon them. The Hydra Kilika seemed delirious. Its gigantic body resounded with a chilling flesh-grinding sound. It invoked scenes of a millstone grinding pork. Its limbs and tentacles frantically danced around, continuously releasing wave after wave of people that barricaded both Nicholas and Gleeward. The two elite Supreme-class warriors wielded legendary anti-mystic equipment. They fought hand-in-hand among the masses of people controlled by the mystic, strenuously advancing forward. With great perseverance, they both endured the wails and screams of the residents as they slaughtered their way through a crowd of people, only to get a little closer to the mystic after great difficulty. However, the young lady with a bright smile just shook her head ever so slightly. A giant tentacle extended from behind her and sent her 20 meters back. More people controlled by the mystic wandered out from the rift created by her tentacles. They encircled the two supreme-class humans and inadvertently blocked out all the space that the tentacles vacated. Just 10 meters away, under an unassuming low wall, Thales was attentively listening to Black Sword's explanation in shock and surprise. The power of eradication originates from an undeveloped potential in the human body. Through special methods, for example, we can use specific wrestling methods and sword styles to ignite these available powers. The words from Black Sword's mouth was laced with a slight authoritative tone, which would have caused anyone around to unconsciously perk up their ears. It can increase one's ability, intrinsic qualities, or adaptability towards certain atmospheres in large or small degrees for any length of time. He stared at Thales in a grave and intense manner. The form in which the power of eradication exists varies from person to person. There are many types. Some exist as visible light rays, some fuse with the organ tissues, some even circulate endlessly throughout the body around the clock, some target specific parts, whereas some pervade the entire body. Even if the power of eradication is of the same type, it is often varied and diverse when different people utilize it. Thales frowned. If it's varied and diverse, then how is he going to teach me? Black Sword seemed to have heard his thoughts. As the Hydra emitted a roaring sound from within its flesh, he steadily said, "Still, there are common characteristics available for reference. A majority of the powers of eradication have specific forms and functions when awakened." Black Sword exhaled. All the muscles in his body trembled as if they were doing a final warm-up. He said, just as glory of the stars prolongs mental excitement and the body's endurance substantially, just as thawing of glaciers persistently strengthens resistance against pressure and perspective, just as Pegasus music promotes resonance with the external environment on the largest extreme, and just as the sword of baptism's death instantly collapses a human's self-defense mechanism. For those who have awakened such power of eradication, their battle styles and usage of abilities naturally form into individual tendencies as well as habits, following the specific form of the power of eradication. Then, Black Sword instantly switched their topic of discussion. But, the sin of Hell's River is not the same. Black Sword's expression began to turn cold. It is one of the least recorded power of eradications. Based on the experience of some of our predecessors and myself, it originates from the most incredible potential of life, Black Sword said slowly. The will to survive. Thales' heart tightened. He recalled his bitter encounter in the birch tree forest when Serena strangled him while he was in the air. So, the existence of sin of Hell's River is fundamentally to extend the life of someone dying. Black Sword inhaled slowly and regulated his breathing. It is the ultimate struggle with everything at stake. He gave the prince a meaningful glance. This is also the premise needed before we awaken the sin of Hell's River. It awakens during moments when we nearly die, stimulates all essence of life and exhausts all possibilities which will allow a person to live. It's because of this that makes it different from most powers of eradication. The sin of Hell's River has no specific form. In other words, it can exist in any form and exercise its function. Thales narrowed his pupils. It can exist in any of the forms that the other powers of eradication can take. He began to understand what Black Sword meant. That's right, Black Sword smiled. He nodded and looked at Kilika in the distance. And for that, Black Sword narrowed his eyes, his pupils fixated on the battle afar. Sin of Hell's River can even be referred to as the universal power of eradication. As the both of them talked, Nicholas and Gleeward were struggling to hold on. We can't go on like this anymore. With a cold expression, Nicholas chopped off a woman's head with the severing soul's blade. The panic in her eyes before she died left the experienced warrior with a heavy weight in his heart as he faced the next confused-looking old man. Nicholas exercised his sore shoulder lightly as he glanced at the corpses around them. He could not help but frown. Although by relying on the legendary anti-mystic equipment, we can protect ourselves, we're eventually going to die by exhaustion. The Star Killer took a look at the frantic expression and burning fury in Gleeward's eyes. He silently pondered. Perhaps, after Gleeward manages to kill enough people and reach a critical point, he'll have an immediate mental breakdown. Gleeward roared furiously as he brandished his pike. The pike head slashed into 3 people, but he was scratched on his left shoulder by a girl, who attacked him from the back. The civilians of Shield District who were slashed fell to their deaths under the effects of elimination. Gleeward tried his best to not look at their expressions before they died, but his entire body was already trembling violently. Do you have any idea on how to get through? Gleeward gritted his teeth and took a step back. He was very aggravated. Don't tell me that you're actually Kingdom's Wrath. We can't get through. Nicholas stared intently at the lady standing before the Hydra. His sword flashed as he drew it from its sheath, and he said, but we can make it impossible for her to retreat. Gleeward's expression changed. The next moment, the Star Killer's demeanor changed. Nicholas's pale face flushed red. He retrieved his arms and no longer attacked the dense crowd of people before his eyes. His finger made contact with the severing soul's blade. In a fraction of a second, a snapping sound was heard. The severing soul's blade with 2 curves broke into 2 halves from the protruding end of the blade's spine. The blood mystic who saw all of this raised her brows as she instinctively felt something amiss. The bloody patches on her face quivered. The blade's fracture seemed especially uniform. The Star Killer had the broken blade in one hand, and the remaining half of the severing soul's blade in his other. He revealed a mysterious smile. The border starts here, he lightly said. In the next second, Nicholas's figure shifted. The power of eradication within him began to quake. On one side of his body, he pushed through 3 civilians, who were controlled by the mystic in an inconceivable motion. Amid the civilians' screams, he lightly stepped on their shoulders and leapt into the air. If Ida had been there, she would have immediately recognized it as his perfect, nimble, and unavoidable footsteps, shuttling among the crowds when they first met. Giza's expression changed. Immediately, a few controlled civilians bent their knees and demonstrated a monstrous single-legged bounce. They leapt towards Nicholas in the air. The Soul Sayer pike in Gleeward's hand drew a big, rarely seen circle at this moment and it swept across the sky. Swash. Enduring the injuries he sustained on his back from the siege, Gleeward roared as he swept aside the civilians who were trying to intercept Nicholas, turning them into lifeless corpses. Nicholas then leapt into the air without any hindrance. At that very second, he stared deeply at Giza in the distance. Across the dozens of densely packed people, the Star Killer extended his arm. The broken blade emitted a swishing sound as it broke through the wind and launched itself directly at the mystic's face. Giza's expression changed drastically. Amid the ear-piercing winds, she cautiously extended 2 tentacles from her body. They struck the ground and propelled her backwards. Thud. The blade firmly punctured the ground only a few meters away from the blood mystic. Nicholas's face remained unchanged as he fell from the air. The broken blade deflected an opponent who was ready to attack him from behind. Giza narrowed her eyes. She stared at the blade in the ground and said nothing. However, just a second later, Nicholas lightly brandished his blade. His eyes were bursting with sharp rays as he coldly said, "And the border ends here." The mystic's expression remained unchanged. There were no traces of the slightest doubt. But in that moment, Nicholas burst out with the most emotional bellow since the start of the battle, "Assault!" As though receiving a supreme command, Gleeward opened his mouth and brandished his vibrating pike with a ferocious expression. He pierced through two innocent opponents in front of him and slaughtered his way through with tears in his eyes. Ah! Nicholas was not to be outdone by Gleeward's roar. The half-broken blade in his hands flashed with an unobservable light as it slid across the neck of a wailing teenager. He then dashed in the direction of the mystic. "You only have one chance. Break through." In the eyes of the blood mystic, these two supreme-class warriors did not care about the consequences they suffered, the wounds they sustained, and the lack of defenses on their bodies, and they broke through the dense crowd of people with their assault. With a slight tilt of her head, more people walked out of the tentacles and surrounded the two assaulters. However, Nicholas and Gleeward's assault did not stop. Both of their bodies were riddled with scratches and cuts. Yet, they invariably brought forth their most ferocious state and fought hand in hand as they moved towards her. They were getting closer to the mystic. Giza eventually closed her eyes. As quickly as before, Kilika extended a giant tentacle from behind. It latched onto her waist and curled backward. However, the unexpected happened right then. Not more than a dozen meters into the mystic's retreat on the tentacle, the severing soul's blade that was thrusted into the ground suddenly shone. The broken blade flashed with the most dazzling yellow rays. The tentacle protecting Giza continued to drag her backwards, but the exact same yellow rays on the blade suddenly flashed behind her. Giza's face changed. The tentacle was still retreating, but Giza seemed to be held back by a huge, invisible hand as she was forcibly stopped before a barrier, which was formed by the yellow rays. The tentacle exerted force, but it had no way of dragging Giza out of the range of the yellow rays. It seemed as if it was jammed into something. Giza looked up sharply at the ground in front of her, at the blade that broke off from the severing soul's blade. "It's that blade. That's the problematic one." Giza did not have much time to ponder. Moments later, the two supreme-class warriors broke through the dense crowd. With bodies stained with blood, they ferociously went to attack the mystic, who could not move an inch backwards. 10 meters, 5 meters, 4 meters, 3 meters, both of them were getting closer and closer to Giza. "Do it," Nicholas roared as he elbowed away an opponent on the left. He turned with resolution and slashed with his blade. In the midst of the bloody whirlwind, he slaughtered 3 to 4 people while he covered Gleeward's back at all costs. With moist tear tracks and a heart filled with resentment, Gleeward brandished the life-stealing Soul Slayer pike as he stepped within 3 meters of the mystic, and struck. The flashing of the yellow rays behind the blood mystic grew more and more urgent. They continued to hinder her from retreating to the back. The pike was about to strike Giza between the eyes. Clank. In the nick of time, a veteran suddenly emerged next to her. Big Leather Belt firmly grasped the Soul Slayer pike. The head of the pike was only an inch away from Giza's face. The difference from the previous time was that this time, the void behind Giza flashed with a strange light, blocking her from retreating even a little bit. She could only stay stuck rigidly between the Soul Slayer pike and the light rays. She had no room to move, and her situation was incredibly dangerous. "Chief Gleeward," Big Leather Belt grabbed the Soul Slayer pike with a face full of tears. "I'm sorry." Nicholas's figure shifted again. The broken blade whirled as metal clashed, and in a short period of time, Gleeward was protected all around. "It's nothing." Gleeward gritted his teeth. With hatred in his eyes, he glared at Big Leather Belt, who could not help but stand between the mystic and the Soul Slayer pike. Just another unfortunate battle. The three of them stood in a deadlock. The crowd of people surrounding the both of them seemed to have received some sort of order. They stopped abruptly and withdrew amid the terrified wailing of their controller. Nicholas was finally given a chance to take a breather. He took a step back as he and Gleeward, who was pointing the Soul Slayer pike at the mystic, stood back to back. Giza bowed her head, her lips moved slightly as her voice rang in the ears of the two supreme-class warriors. "What is this?" the mystic plainly asked. The ability of severing Soul's blade. Nicholas clenched his chest as he glanced at the blade in the ground and then at Big Leather Belt, who was blocking the Soul Slayer pike. His expression was unpleasant. With the broken blade as the center, it completely separates an area from the outside world for a short amount of time. "You can enter, but you can't exit." Nicholas exhaled a visibly warm breath. Gleeward gritted his teeth, his eyes still filled with hatred. "Enough to trap you here, Wh. Giza squinted. The yellow rays behind her remained, firmly blocking her path of retreat. Yet, she seemed indifferent. Her lips barely moved as she asked, "How rare, yet another piece of equipment I've never seen before." "It's funny, now that it's being mentioned. This ability has a very upsetting name. Nicholas's face twitched. Eventually, he took a deep breath and said somewhat rigidly, "It's called, you'll never escape." A cold wind blew past them. The Hydra pulled Giza in vain as the latter was firmly bound by the yellow rays, unable to move. HMPH, the blood mystic snorted coldly. Must be the work of that B*TCH, blood spike. Nicholas vigilantly monitored the crowd of people around them. Without batting an eyelid, he nudged his partner behind him. Empress Blood Spike initially created this sword to resist the virtual mystic, that elusive, undetectable existence. Kilika released an enraged howl from its flesh and blood, though the meaning was unknown. Just to defeat Zarkal, the blood mystic shook her head slowly. How sad that fool will be when he hears that you've said that. Nicholas turned his head around and stared at Giza. Of course, we only realized later that the Severing Soul's blade can be pretty useful against most calamities when paired with other equipment. Such as right now, you'll never be escaped now. The blood mystic fixed her gaze on them as her expression stiffened. Game over, WH. Gleeward looked formidable while holding up the Soul Slayer pike. It looked like he wanted to just chop the mystic up with his eyes. Let's attack, Nicholas coldly urged his partner. Let's finish this. Are you ready, Big Leather Belt? Gleeward nodded, looking at his controlled former colleague. Fury and oppression flashed across his eyes. Of course, Chief. Big Leather Belt first smiled in distress, then his face stiffened as he said somehow sorrowfully, I have a daughter. Gleeward furrowed his brows upon hearing those words. Shield District is almost completely ruined. Only a small percentage of residents living outside the city were evacuated. I'm afraid, his daughter may. Yet, Gleeward took a deep breath and gritted his teeth. I'll take care of her for you. A translucent sparkle flashed across Big Leather Belt's eyes. At that moment, he had a serene smile on his face. Thank you. The next second, under Big Leather Belt's relieved gaze, Gleeward's body resounded with an explosive crack. As if with great force, the Soul Slayer pike in his hands vibrated as it was set free from Big Leather Belt's hands and stabbed straight forward. Rip. The Soul Slayer pike pierced through Big Leather Belt's chest. It reverberated with the muffled sound of metal grinding against his sternum. The smile of relief remained frozen on Big Leather Belt's face as he turned into a withered corpse. The rays of light behind the mystic flashed more and more urgently. It still hindered her from retreating. Shick. The pike went deeper through Big Leather Belt's back. Then, it pierced the mystic, right between her eyes. And through the back of her head. In that moment, the mystic hung her mouth wide open. She trembled, yet she could not utter a single word. It seemed as though she was experiencing endless pain. Behind her, Kilika emitted a terrifying squishing sound. Its gigantic body slowly slumped. The crowd of people around them stopped moving. Giza's face began to blacken and crisp up. Like a chapped and cracked piece of dead wood, fragments fell off from her. Nicholas exhaled. He was gasping for breath as he staggered 2 steps forward. He picked up the blade that was stuck in the ground and slowly secured it on the broken end of the Severing Soul's blade. The broken end flashed with a glaring yellow ray as the 2 pieces of metal seamlessly fused back together. It was bright and as good as new, like it was never broken. Gleeward closed his eyes. He propped his pike barrel on the ground and knelt on one knee in exhaustion. It had ended. Nicholas turned around and looked at the collapsing Hydra. Wait a minute. Gleeward's explosive shout rang at this moment. Nicholas immediately peered at him with a surprised look on his face. How can this be? The Soul Slayer pike, it's still vibrating. The crippled veteran hung his mouth open in disbelief. He looked at Giza, who was shattered like pieces of pottery. He pulled the pike strenuously and yanked it out. This isn't her, Gleeward exclaimed with grief. It's not the WH. Nicholas was startled. Under their shocked gazes, fragments fell from Giza's face. It revealed a delicate face, which had long been silenced. After the mystic's outer appearance peeled off, an innocent girl materialized before their eyes. Gleeward narrowed his pupils instantly. No. He shuddered along with the pike in his hand. It was like looking at the world's most terrible tragedy. No. Tears spilled uncontrollably from the veteran's face. No. This is. He stared blankly at the girl's face. This is Big Leather Belt's daughter. That girl, who always had a smile on her face each and every day, that girl who went back and forth across Shield District, collecting old clothes to make new ones. No. Gleeward's face twisted to the extreme. With absolute despair, he howled in devastation. WH. The battle-seasoned Nicholas had a steely look on his face. He spread his arms out at the speed of a thunderbolt as he turned around to face the surrounding crowd of people. But it was too late. The countless crowd of people instantly moved and rushed towards Nicholas, who had let his guard down. He was engulfed by a mass of humans. The next moment, a tentacle quietly flew out from within the crowd in the twinkling of an eye. Bang! Reacting too slow, Gleeward was firmly hit by the tentacle. Due to its boundless strength, the crippled veteran was flung dozens of meters away. Whump! Like a broken sack, Gleeward slammed into a pile of wreckage. His body rolled several times as earth and stone flew into the air before he lay motionlessly on the ground. It seemed like he had lost all consciousness. His soul slayer pike flew in a different direction. It rolled across the ground as it made a dull clattering sound. No. Nicholas's roar of indignation broke through the crowd. Beaten black and blue, he fought through the crowd of people who possessed inexhaustible strength, speed and extraordinary reflexes. Blood splattered as the Star Killer rolled a few meters away. With his hand propped on the ground, he raised his head powerlessly and looked at Gleeward, not knowing if he was dead or alive. Kilika, who had originally been swaying, leapt up with life again as a tentacle extended and split open. A gentle, bright and beautiful lady, the real blood mystic appeared atop the tentacle. She radiated with a pleasant smile. With a dull expression, Nicholas looked at Giza, and then at the substitute who had fallen under the Soul Slayer pike. No, you, when did you switch bodies? Nicholas trembled in disbelief. Giza just looked at him with a smile, as if she were looking at a mischievous child. Nicholas closed his eyes as he punched the ground and shouted towards the sky in sorrow. It's my fault. I should have known. From the very beginning, that mystic never smiled, moved her lips or made any exaggerated expressions. Thinking back now, she's been a substitute all along. The blood mystic's gentle voice came from afar. See, it's not that difficult to alter someone's appearance with a little dead skin, right? Giza tilted her head mischievously. It saved my cute, little creatures from being attacked by the Soul Slayer pike, and saved me from being endangered as well. I even got to admire your exciting performance while you were both being deceived. Giza giggled as she looked at Nicholas's resentful expression. She waved her hand. And all I had to do was stand in the same line as my substitute. Even the Soul Slayer pike that can position a mystic can't differentiate a substitute from the real person. The Soul Slayer pike is now out of the game. The mystic squinted as she looked at Gleeward in the distance. Listen well now, this is a lesson from the WHRE. At that instant, Giza's expression became incomparably icy. Never ever let your guard down. Arg, Nicholas shouted in pain and grievance. The next moment, like a turbulent flood breaking through the embankment, overwhelming the heavens and earth, countless tentacles and crowds of controlled people rushed towards the unconscious Gleeward, and Nicholas, who was riddled with wounds. The two wielders of the legendary anti-mystic equipment had finally fallen at the hands of the mystic. Nicholas gritted his teeth, his hand gripping his blade as he trembled with fury. He staggered up and watched his enemies come from all directions. He lifted his blade powerlessly. The blade slashed into a tentacle, turning it into ashes. Its hilt knocked away a wailing child, who pounced on him like a falcon hunting its prey. He fell to the ground. No, Gleeward. Nicholas felt the blood dripping from his forehead and pondered in despair. We lost. At this moment, the blood mystic's expression changed. She turned her head suddenly and looked in another direction. There, two of Kilika's gigantic tentacles shuddered almost at the same time. They turned into billowing ashes one after the other. A figure breached into the Hydra's range, causing it to stir restlessly. Giza narrowed her eyes and observed the ashy pieces of flesh billowing in the air. Legendary anti-mystic equipment. A third one. Very quickly, the mystic recognized the incoming figure. Giza's eyebrows twitched. It was an old acquaintance. Less than 20 meters away from her, Black Sword's figure vaguely appeared amid the siege of dense tentacles. But wherever he went, the blood mystic's flesh creations turned into billowing ash. Black Sword advanced courageously towards Giza in a position of assault. He whispered to Thales, who had the blade of purification in his embrace, "Mark my words, we only have one chance. We are approaching it now." Thales took a deep breath. With resolution in his eyes, he slowly nodded. At this moment, Black Sword and Thales burst into the battlefield. Chapter 178 True Form. The battle will be intense. It's normal to feel nervous or scared, and feel stiffness in your limbs. That's normal among new recruits. When the time comes, there's only one thing you should do: recall what I am telling you repeatedly to stay focused. Black Sword hurtled through several obstacles as he headed towards the blood mystic in an incredible speed. The movement of his sword vaguely resembled the Northland military sword style. Thales was held close to the man's chest in one arm. He looked up as the air current swooshed past his ears. Clasping the oddly shaped blade of purification in his hand, Thales moved forward at the speed of the wind along with Black Sword. Although those two men are the very few supreme-class warriors we can find, I have a feeling that they will lose the fight despite their powerful anti-mystic equipment. The blood mystic, who looks like a seemingly harmless girl, is a frightening opponent. For the past 12 years, I've never met an enemy who made me feel fearful and anxious, until she appeared. Amid the whirring chilly wind, the prince could not open his eyes. Instead, he kept his mouth open wide, gasping for air to maintain his breathing rate. He could not help but recall Black Sword's words before they left for Giza. What makes her formidable is not her grotesque sorcery or limitless power, but the fact that she truly owns what I would like to call the heart of a strong fighter. As powerful as she is also cautious and decisive. She refuses to let go of any opportunity, and never looks down on any opponent, always quick to respond and always prepared for a change of plan. Although some of her actions may seem close to insanity, they don't affect her ability and her commitment to the battle. That monster has deep insight when it comes to combat. She apprehends every aspect of it and is highly experienced. I've met very few people who possess such tactical mastery. When Black Sword started to run with Thales in his arm, the prince's mind went blank. It felt like the time when he was falling from the cliff of the sky, which was several hundred meters high. The first tentacle from the Hydra appeared before them, and Thales heard the hissing sound of human tissues brushing up against one another. Black Sword held the prince's hand and swung the blade of purification. Hiss. The tentacle fell apart and turned into ashes. Thales regained his ability to breathe. His heart swelled with all sorts of emotions, anxiety, fear, agitation, and excitement. The first thing we need to acknowledge is that the blood mystic has never appeared before us in her true form. Thinking of this, Thales clenched his teeth slightly. He reflected on what Black Sword had told him, slowly taking in the shock it delivered. What we're seeing is a body double created from the flesh of others. This is what I learned from fighting her twice. It was information I exchanged with my blood as I walked the tightrope between life and death. In other words, it's false to assume that legendary anti-mystic equipment cannot seal that monster, just as you've said. The real reason is, the people who have tried to put a seal on her couldn't identify her true form amid the ocean of flesh and blood. Thales frowned slightly, peering at the sweet-looking girl from far. Not her true form. From the distance, Giza looked up at them with a peculiar expression. Does it mean that, this, Giza, who just defeated 2 legendary anti-mystic equipment is a fake? That's why, even when Sonya crushed her with the Supreme Shield, she still managed to come out unscathed. Swoosh. A swishing sound was heard as something shot through the wind. 2 medium-sized tentacles flew towards them, one from above and another below. When we are up against her, we shall explore every possibility, look for every opportunity to gain the upper hand, and bet on every leverage we have. We will begin with finding her true form. Thales sensed a form of energy bubbling within Black Sword. The latter then took a stride and stomped on a rock lightly. They rose a foot above the ground. Black Sword pivoted in the air, gliding between the 2 tentacles. First of all, the timing. When those 2 men fail, and she begins to eliminate them, that's the time we enter the battle zone. At that time, she'll be hesitant, confused, or simply distracted. It will be our best chance. We can save a little energy and time on, storming, to approach her body double. Suspended in the air, Thales faced skyward and watched a tentacle whiz past him. He could also see Nicholas from a distance. The man's struggling silhouette eventually sank into the swamp of flesh and blood. There was a piece of tissue which resembled half a tongue embedded in the tentacle. It brushed past Thales' nose and reeked of blood as well as rancid, rotten things. Thales suppressed the discomfort in his throat and stomach, as well as the urge to shut his eyes. He wanted to have a clear look of his enemy. Every possibility. Every chance. Every leverage. He gritted his teeth, recalling every word Black Sword said earlier. The second important thing would be the way we present ourselves before the opponent. Once the fight begins, it's best to display the mystic's natural enemy, the anti-mystic weapon. Besides making us seem more menacing to her, the longer she stays astonished and confused, even for a second, the more weaknesses she exposes. It will also draw her attention to me. Black Sword grabbed Thales' hand, in which the blade of purification was tightly held. He guided Thales' sword-wielding hand and the blade sliced across 2 of the tentacles, leaving them with 2 nasty gashes. The tentacles turned black as a burnt coal and disintegrated into ashes. The distance between them and Giza shortened to a mere 30 meters. Noticing them from afar, the blood mystic hummed curiously. Giza slowly inhaled as the blood-red veins on her cheeks quivered. Right. There is another anti-mystic weapon, other than the Soul Slayer pike and severing soul blade. This has been a night full of surprises. Speckles of ash fell upon Thales' face, blending into the melted snow. He felt a violent tremble rack his body as Black Sword landed on both feet. Lightly pushing on the ground with his left hand, he instantly regained his balance. He continued to advance at the same speed. The glacial wind turned the water on Thales' face into snow and ice flakes. The little prince had to move his cheeks by gnashing his teeth and grinning in order to get the ice off his nearly frozen face. A giant tentacle was swinging their way. It split into countless smaller tentacles and came at Black Sword from every direction. They swore to take their prey down at all cost, leaving no room for the latter to escape. Thales was prepared for this to happen. Black Sword would slash his way out, and clear the path with the blade of purification. Instead, the man hunched his body and made a sharp turn away from the hundreds of tentacles, which were like the forked tongues of snakes. Panic-stricken, Thales' head began to spin. Our point of entry is something to consider as well. We need to find a path covered with ruins and obstacles. It will provide us the best view and hiding spots even if we are just partially sheltered and protected from the attack. Black Sword picked a lane full of rocks and mud, where the houses on both sides had fallen into ruin due to the fight between the 2 mystics. They ran into a collapsed hut, ducking behind a mud wall. The flesh tentacles came at them from every direction. Some smaller ones around the mud wall stretched over it. Bang! One tentacle in the middle struck the mud wall mercilessly and crushed it. The debris flew towards Thales' face, but some of them were slapped away by Black Sword. The moment the mud wall was crushed and the tentacles slowed down, Black Sword was on the move again. Fueled by a surge of strange energy, he increased his speed. Crash! Black Sword lunged at the crushed mud wall, squeezing through a thin crack. Pieces of gravel fell off and grazed his skin, leaving wounds and scratches. Thales squeezed his eyes shut, feeling the dust and bits of sand falling past his cheeks. As pieces of mud and gravel rained upon them, Black Sword gripped Thales' hand and swung the blade of purification, chopping off 6 small tentacles in front of the mud wall. The burning stench of blood filled Thales' nose. Ashes of human flesh were scattered around them. Black Sword broke through the mud wall and advanced 5 more meters. Only when we cherish every opportunity during a fight, like how travelers in the desert cherish every drop of water, we can accumulate odds that are in our favor. Victory and survival depend largely on one's focus on every small detail, especially when up against something like the Blood Mystic. With his rare and peculiar power of eradication, Black Sword managed to dodge several attacks from the Hydra and broke through blockades with the blade of purification. Beneath the falling snow, dust rose from the ground under his feet. Their path ahead then became hazy. Thales clenched his teeth, enduring the torment of coldness and extreme speeds. He felt Black Sword's right arm around his waist tighten, threatening to cut him into half. The distance between them and Giza gradually shortened. She was now less than 20 meters away. As we break through the obstacles, you will enter her field of vision. Giza spotted the boy in Black Sword's arm. She smiled. I see, I was wondering why Kilika couldn't find you anywhere, the mystic said softly with a velvety voice. As Black Sword moved forward, dodged attacks, broke through blockades, and fought against enemies at the speed of a bullet, Thales, who was accompanying him, could see the Blood Mystic's horrid expression from far. My condition is far from well and it won't allow me to stay in storming mode for too long. Fortunately, we have the blade of purification, which will keep us unaffected by her power, or at least not fall into the claws of her flesh puppets. Looks like you've found yourself a new bodyguard. What a smart child. Giza took a peek at the stone-faced Black Sword, watching as they came closer and closer to her. Don't worry, the veins on her cheek split and grew further, making her smile appear eerily disturbing. Everything will end soon. Thales felt a jolt in his chest. If her target is you, with such a short distance between us, chances are she will stay where she is, as she is aiming for a weak prey, and given the fact that she cannot be sealed, she will plan to finish me off within a short amount of time, and capture you. Giza lifted her arms. Fusk. Behind her, the Hydra Kilika roared. 6 giant tentacles stretched out from its body. Amid the quaking earth and noise, the giant tentacles charged at the duo. Some burst out of the ground, while some dove from the sky. That will be our chance. The giant tentacles lay across the street, blocking the duo's path. Black Sword tightened his grasp on Thales' right hand. He averted his cold gaze to another direction. Krook. The tentacle split open, and countless black monsters emerged from the gaping hole on the tissue made of severed limbs and corpses. About the size of a human child, they each had long limbs and a torso like that of a spider. The monsters landed, and with a violent shiver, bony thorns sprouted out from their skin. Her true form should be hiding in one of her disgusting flesh creations. She could be underground, inside those tentacles, inside that big monster, or anything made of blood and flesh, like a drop of water in the ocean, or a tree in the forest. We need to find her true form in this sea of blood and flesh. Hiss. Like a nest of ravenous larvae, the monsters' torsos cracked open to reveal mouth-like holes, from which chilling hisses were emitted. At the next second, like desperate child beggars spotting a rich person on the street, the black monsters raised their heads, and swung their limbs. Some scurried or hopped away, while some rolled or crawled. There were even a few of them flapping their hideous wings in the air, swarming towards Thales and Black Sword. Soon enough, they blocked their view of Giza. Hiss, hiss. Thales shuddered, gawking at the horrific situation before him and feeling his skin crawl. The Blood Mystic is good at learning from each battle, processing the information within a little amount of time and coming up with solutions for tactics employed by her previous opponents. Take me for example, whenever we met after our previous battle, she would have a new strategy to deal with me. This basically means, the same courting tactic will surely never work on chronically single people. Thales shook off these unnecessary thoughts. He was in the midst of the most dangerous battle he had ever seen. He could not afford to lose focus. Greeted by the cold wind that was blowing in his face, Thales kept his eyes half shut. Moving forward at a high speed, he could feel his heart threatening to burst out of his chest. He bit his lips, trying to stay focused as he recalled what Black Sword had told him earlier. The first time we fought, I evaded the attacks of her tentacles with the help of Trembler, a move I learned from a supreme class assassin, and which I made slight alterations to. However, the second time we ran into each other in the alleyway, when I used Trembler again, she adopted a new strategy as well. The monsters transformed, each covered with sharp bony thorns to tackle my power. You see that, the monsters with bony thorns. Amid the whirring wind, Black Sword's words reached Thales' ears in fragments. They are created solely to beat my power, Trembler. Thales took a deep breath, peering at the coal-black monsters. There was an overwhelming number of them, not to mention they looked heinous and hideous. This image gave Thales a chill. They looked like a storm comprised of thousands and millions of black locusts, which were now coming for him. Black Sword darted at the herd of monsters without hesitation. It was as though what awaited him ahead was not life-threatening danger, but a blissful illusion. The second time we clashed, she gained the upper hand in a matter of seconds. I was almost killed by those little monsters. This time, Black Sword did not hold back. He took no shortcuts, and spared no effort. Thales only felt a shudder travel through Black Sword's entire body while he was by his side. A pulsating feeling that felt as if it had substance surged up from the depths of his body. He knew, this was the sin of Hell's River. The sin of Hell's River, which belonged uniquely to Black Sword, compared to Thales' own, it was greater, more proficient, and several thousand times more effective. The chill that originally just lingered around him surged into Thales' heart as if it possessed substance, causing him to shiver. Thales felt as if the man beside him had become different. Black Sword's expression turned solemn and somber. His faintly discernible presence started to become more violent and brutal. His muscles also began to bulge vaguely. Black Sword's pupils, which were originally filled with determination and ferocity, slowly started to expand, and more light entered his eyes. During that instant, Black Sword was like a ferocious beast that slowly opened its eyes, revealing its claws as well as its fangs. Eventually, the first black monster charged towards them from the sky, and at this point, it was only 1 foot away from Black Sword's head. The bone spurs on its body shivered slightly, like an indication that it had become sharper. Behind it were countless of its kind, and they were equally fierce as well as terrifying. As they roared, their cries spread throughout the sky and earth. They were coming towards the duo like waves. Compared to them, the length of the blade of purification seemed quite insignificant. At that time, I was forced to activate instant death among those monsters, extinguish all signs of my life, and avoid her senses to save myself. I believe that once we meet each other for the third time, she will immediately have a way to counter instant death. Hiss. The spider-like monsters looked like a pitch-black wave, surging towards Black Sword. It appeared as though they were about to overturn this small, helpless ship that was Black Sword. Thales inhaled a sharp breath, then held it, pinning his instinctively shuddering left arm tightly under his right armpit. It did not matter who the man was, at that moment, he could only believe Black Sword. He could only believe him. But in that instant when she changed the tentacles and turned them all into numerous bone spur monsters, I sensed. The next moment, Black Sword let out a low roar in the face of the huge, boundless wave formed by the black monsters. He pinned Thales tightly atop his bosom with all his limbs, and Thales hugged the blade of purification tightly against his chest. Before the first monster used its bone spur and stabbed Black Sword in the head. Black Sword instantly bent over, his entire body tilted forward, in the direction of the monsters. It was as if he was a small ship toppling over in a huge wave. For an instant, Thales sensed as if everything around him was spinning around. The countless black monsters belonging to the blood mystic before him also started to spin before his eyes. They were getting closer. And Thales was also getting dizzier. His own fluctuations surged into his mind in the nick of time, and they caused the dizziness to subside. I can sense her hiding among the flesh and blood underground. A vigorous fluctuation is coming from some unknown direction. Black Sword had long since folded himself into a ball and he rolled towards the aggressive black monsters that were flashing out their ferocious bone spurs. They continued to roll forward. According to my senses, those fluctuations are incomparably distinct. It's practically impossible to hide them. Black Sword slammed his right elbow hard into the ground. Thud. He pounded it against a low stone stool. I believe that this is her true form. I'm certain of it. At the next instant, Thales only sensed an extreme tremor coming from Black Sword's right arm, which was wrapped around him. Bang! Muffled sounds of something shattering rose from the ground. It was like the crackling sound of a hot pot when the soup inside reached its boiling point. Soon after, the stone stool shattered. A gigantic stone slab was sent flying from the ground in a bizarre manner. The moment the stone slab flew into the air, Black Sword's tumbling body came to an abrupt halt. Thales felt nauseous. He saw stars and almost hurled. Black Sword then planted his feet on the ground. Out of habit, he positioned his body in a manner that made him look like he was about to topple over. His body formed an acute angle to the ground, then he charged swiftly forward. Black Sword used his bulging right arm to press against that gigantic stone slab. It was instantly positioned in front of him, and he pushed it forward during his charge. This reduced Black Sword's speed, but it also provided him defense. This is our greatest ability, the ability to lock down on the monster's true form. But during that short instant where I managed to sense her, I could only obtain an approximate direction of where she's located. If we rush forward recklessly, we'll only make her notice beforehand. Then, she'll be able to make preparations to avoid being discovered. That's why the next thing we need to do is persevere under her attacks against us. When we rush some distance forward, we can force that bizarre fluctuation of hers to appear the second time. Then, the intersection point from the two different locations where the fluctuations appear will be where her true form is. In the next second, Black Sword rushed into the swarm of monsters as he supported the thick stone slab. Everything around them darkened. The monsters that covered the sky and earth blotted out their entire vision. Hisssssssss. Countless hisses filled Thales' ears, making him incredibly agitated and nervous. Would they succeed? Maybe. Charging right into their faces, the first monster sent one of its spurs into Black Sword's face. Black Sword lowered his head slightly, and buried his head behind the stone slab. Crash. The monster's bone spur stabbed the stone slab and set off bright sparks into the air, but it did not manage to damage a strand of hair on Black Sword's head. It could only see Black Sword rush past its side. The second monster extended a bone spur filled with barbs and tried to cut Black Sword's abdomen, where Thales was. Thales stared at the approaching bone spur and listened to the buzzing sounds. His head was completely blank. But with a slight move from Black Sword, the stone slab shifted and it was pressed against his abdomen to block the monster's ambush. Bang! With the stone slab's defense, Black Sword continued to rush forward. Countless black, spider-like monsters surged towards Black Sword and Thales' sides like a swarm of locusts. Amid the crashes, clashes, and chunks of the stone slab and bone spurs, Black Sword wrapped his arm around the pale and ashen Thales. He then lowered his head and pressed it against the stone slab while he charged forward in a mad manner. There would occasionally be one or two monsters that would slip through. They would slip through the cracks on the stone slab, and slice at Black Sword's abdomen, the side of his thighs, his shoulders, or other parts of his body, but they would either be reduced to ashes by the blade of purification that Thales held or be flung off with an extreme speed. Thales kept his eyes open with all his effort. Within his field of vision were innumerable black bone spurs and limbs. They moved away from his line of sight like flowing water. We will force her to transform the second time and force her to send out those fluctuations. The chance for her to reveal her true form will be. After a few seconds passed, the stone slab used for defense shattered inch by inch under the numerous attacks launched on it. Shattered stones and blood fell from Black Sword's body at the same time. And at the same time, Black Sword shuddered. She's there. Rip. The sharp thorn of a black monster grazed his shoulder and brought with it a trail of blood. Slash. The second one pierced his left thigh. She's at the spot where I fought against her the second time and used instant death. But Black Sword did not seem to notice his wounds. His face was ashen, but besides pinning Thales tightly to his bosom, he did not have any sort of reaction to his increasing wounds. It was as if he had lost his senses and he was charging forward without feeling. It's a skill that will allow him to extinguish all signs of vitality in his body for a short period of time, thereby allowing him to disappear from his enemy's senses. In an instant, Thales sensed that the man's muscles had started to stiffen. He still moved forward, but it was as if the energy in his body had disappeared. His breathing stopped, and his skin became tough, his actions slowed down, and even his eyes lost their luster. Thales even felt Black Sword's body becoming blurry, though he had no idea if this was just a figment of his imagination. But Thales knew that Black Sword had activated instant death. With uneasiness in his heart, he glanced at the incoming black monsters rushing towards them with hissing sounds. But soon, Thales did not need to be anxious anymore. In a frenzy, the countless black monsters dashed towards them ferociously. Then, like headless flies, they surged past them. With terrifying hisses in the air, the monsters, which were originally rushing towards them like a tidal wave, instantly descended into chaos. It was like having a stone thrown into a still lake. Then, almost every single one of them stopped before they started trembling madly. Like helpless children, they started to look around ceaselessly. The monsters began to jump about and move around in a disorderly fashion, but they did not notice Black Sword at all, whose actions had already slowed down. Like an old man crossing a river with languid steps, but also like a boat moving upstream, Black Sword moved past the densely packed black monsters slowly. It made Thales' skin crawl just by watching them. Black Sword would occasionally trip over a monster or knock against one of them with his shoulder. He would even have new, bloody wounds appear on him, but he still held on to Thales and moved among the swarm of monsters safely. He continued moving forward. Only then did Thales breathe a sigh of relief. Black Sword's presence and Thales' own presence had disappeared from the monster's senses. At the same time, he remembered Black Sword's warning. She's seen instant death before, and she must have already thought of new ways to counter me, whether it's through transformation, going berserk, amplification, proliferation, or ordering the monsters to transform. In the distance, Giza stopped moving for a moment, and the blood mystic's lips moved slightly. The next moment, Kilika the Hydra howled again behind her. In that instant, all the black monsters next to Black Sword transformed. Thales stared at the bone spurs on the monsters' backs, numbering from 1 to 3, as they emitted cracking sounds. It sounded as though they were about to be shattered before they turned into thin, soft limbs, which stood tall in the air. The limbs became smaller, sharper, softer. Just like feelers. Now with feelers, the monsters looked as though they were being exposed to light in the darkness. They were no longer shuddering and spinning around like headless flies. Instead, their feelers rose up and started to swivel them around slowly. The monsters' feelers began to quiver slowly as if they possessed life, and they started to sweep towards Black Sword as well as Thales. Then, they slowly came to a stop as they had already sensed where Black Sword stood. As if they were just making the final confirmation. This is bad. Thales felt fear creep into his heart. As expected, even if they didn't fight each other for more than a quarter of an hour in their previous fight, Giza would have long since prepared to counter instant death. And her counterattack seems to be pretty effective. Then, Thales looked at Black Sword with nervousness in his heart. He was still holding on to him tightly while moving forward amid the swarm of monsters with great difficulty. The latter only closed his eyes and moved forward slowly like a dried log. Thales felt incredibly anxious. Giza has already taken action. Either she transformed, or did something else. So, Black Sword, shouldn't you wake up now? I could sense her true form's location for the second time, and lock down on her completely. Thales hugged the blade of purification in his chest, and stared at the small monsters that had their feelers pointed at Black Sword. His heart thumped loudly against his chest. Eventually, with goosebumps all over his skin, he could not help but poke Black Sword's chest with his finger. But it felt as if he had just poked a beehive. In the blink of an eye, all the black monsters suddenly started moving as if they had just woken up from sleep. With the slightly trembling feelers on their backs and bone spurs, which were as ferocious as ever, they let out frightening hisses again. They kicked the ground with their hind legs simultaneously to pounce at Black Sword and Thales. Hiss. In that instant, Thales felt his skin crawl. Black Sword's movements had been as rigid as an old man's, but in that moment, he suddenly moved. As if he was taking his first breath of air since he was born, Black Sword took a deep breath. Then, his entire body jolted like he had just woken up from a nightmare. Black Sword's eyes flew open. Chapter 179 Silence in Darkness. Having just recovered from instant death, Black Sword calmly looked around at several of the monsters that pounced at them. Within a fraction of a second, Black Sword suddenly let go of Thales and crouched down. He extended his right arm to his leg, straight into a pile of wood debris. He abruptly withdrew his hand the next moment. The old broken wood fell off, and Black Sword held something that looked extremely familiar to Thales, the strange Black Sword. This was the weapon the Blood Mystic seized during the battle just now. How did you find this? Thales was shocked. He suddenly realized that they had returned to the alley from the beginning. It was just that the buildings around them had been flattened during the battle with the mystics. There was no more time for discussion. In the next moment, Black Sword grabbed his own weapon, turned around, and unsheathed his sword in the face of a full onslaught. Just like when they were on the cliff of the sky, Black Sword moved like a dancer. He spun twice in the blink of an eye. Thales saw swift movements executed before his eyes. At the same time, the continuous sound of metal clashing rang next to his ears. The several dozens of dark monsters that were the first to pounce at them actually flew backwards in the air. They fell among layers upon layers of their own kind. Didn't I tell you just now? You must be skilled in identifying objects around you, Black Sword said coldly, and make sure you have your best weapon with you. This is the first rule of the battlefield. Also. Thales watched him anxiously. Black Sword lowered his head and looked at Thales in a profound manner. I found it, the average-looking man spoke concisely. He raised his head and looked in another direction. Thales trembled suddenly. Do you mean? The second wave of monsters pounced on them again and were as densely packed together as ever. Before Thales could react to this, Black Sword extended his injured and weakened left arm without hesitation and grabbed Thales' back collar as his arm shuddered. He then rushed towards a direction that was completely different from where Giza was. He rushed off without regard. Ah! While Thales screamed shrilly, Giza's face froze. What? That direction? At that moment, the dark monsters beside Black Sword stopped charging forward in a synchronized wave formation. Instead, they crowded towards Black Sword together. The monsters crashed frequently into each other, but they still got up from the ground and charged towards Black Sword without regard for anything. The monsters were only there to stall them. Black Sword's charge this time was quick and could not be stopped. There was a determination in him laced with a hint of resolve saying that he would achieve his goal at all costs. He dodged most of the interceptors rapidly, brandished his strange sword without pause and got rid of the other obstacles. Even though he was injured every now and then under the monsters, siege and blood flowed down his skin, Black Sword did not stop at all. He continued charging forward desperately. A second later, the number of blood-colored patches on Giza's face increased at an unprecedented speed. Behind her, Kilika thrashed about frantically and extended its giant tentacles towards Black Sword. Soon, as if they had gone into a frenzy, more tentacles swiftly moved from places near and far away, and above ground or below ground, to join the ranks surrounding them. Giza's expression quickly changed again. Because this time, with eyes shut, Thales held the blade of purification in front of him. Black Sword waved his strange sword with one hand and parried away most of the intercepting attacks. He held Thales up with the other hand, letting the boy finish off all the unavoidable obstacles with his legendary anti-mystic weapon. The tip of the blade moved forward as Black Sword charged. It turned the dark monsters into ash, it turned the intercepting tentacles into ash, it turned all the blood mystics' toys and flesh into ash. Black Sword quickly broke through the dark monster siege. There was a trail of ash behind them, along with flesh puppets that chased frenziedly after them. Thales opened his eyes and lowered the tip of the blade of purification slightly as he panted harshly. They charged towards a massive, dark red tentacle. Strangely, this tentacle did not desperately intercept Black Sword like the others. Instead, it crept backwards. Thales furrowed his brow. It looks frightened. As he stared at the fleeing tentacle, Thales understood why and clenched his teeth softly. They had found Giza's greatest weakness, her real body. But in the next moment, the situation of the scene changed again. A limping figure appeared on the road in front of Black Sword, and Black Sword's pupils narrowed. It was Gleeward, the Soul Slayer Pike's handler, who was a Northland heavy swordsman, and the chief of Shield District and Hammer District. He stood in front of them with an unpleasant face. "Run!" His teeth clenched hard, Gleeward hissed through the gaps of his teeth. His words were full of hatred. "That monster is controlling me." Black Sword creased his brow. On the other hand, Thales' mouth was wide with shock. This is the supreme class elite from just now. He's actually controlled by that monster. Is it just his body being controlled, or... Recalling how Serena and Katerina walked towards Giza in the birch tree forest in spite of themselves, Thales could not help but break out with goosebumps. In the next moment, Gleeward's entire body trembled. He lowered his body and kicked sideways. Black Sword's expression changed. He mercilessly waved the strange sword in his right hand at an angle that made it hard to dodge. However, Gleeward retracted his crippled leg and landed a well-timed kick on the ridge of Black Sword's weapon, stopping the blade. Vigorous and forceful, Gleeward stepped firmly on the strange sword. He then threw a punch. Black Sword had no choice but to put Thales down. He extended his weakened left arm and blocked off his opponent's heavy punch. Behind them, the pursuing monsters and tentacles slowly got closer. I am a heavy swordsman. The instinct carved into my bones compels me to block off others and kill them. In his stalemate with Black Sword, Gleeward said resentfully, and after I reach supreme class, both of you had better flee now, don't let her have her way. Black Sword trembled as he held off Gleeward, feeling the latter's massive strength with a solemn expression. His breathing became heavier when he saw enemies approach from afar. A human controlled by a calamity's ability, a legendary anti-mystic equipment, should be able to undo it. Black Sword inhaled deeply and glanced at the approaching troops in pursuit. He then looked at the giant tentacles that were fleeing further and further away. He sighed. There's no more time. In the next second, the two figures intersected with each other before they let go of their opponent. Thales felt a chill down his spine. Black Sword's words rang in his mind again. The most ideal situation would be for me to escape, instant death, immediately after finding her true body. Then, I would carry you and strike her at her weakest point, sealing her true body before she can react and escape. But, like what I've said before, the Blood Calamity is a combat expert and can come out with thousands of unusual tactics. I'm also far from being at my best. Therefore, something will definitely go wrong in this plan of mine. We have to reduce the damage of these accidents to a minimum, such as consciously making it so that these accidents happen where we want them to. Such as, me. Thales' heartbeat increased without him realizing it. In the blink of an eye, the empty-handed Black Sword had already fought hand-to-hand with Gleeward a few times. With the extra flesh and blood endowed upon him by the Blood Mystic, and thanks to his desperate fighting style and battle instincts, the bare-handed Gleeward was able to quickly take down the weakened Black Sword until he could no longer get up. She doesn't know that you're the one who's actually using the legendary anti-mystic equipment, and would put all her focus on me. So, if an accident happens, if I'm held back by the Blood Calamity and can't, you, kid, are our last trump card. If I'm held up, bound, suppressed or even killed in the battle, you must take over my role. Wield the blade of purification and continue with my unachieved goal. Thales took a deep breath. Black Sword suddenly said, I'm counting on you, kid. Then, Thales felt his collar tighten. The boy turned pale with fear and only had time to utter one word. Wait. The scene before him then changed in a flash. It was only when the howling wind grazed past his ears that Thales suddenly realized Black Sword had flung him away again. Thales could only hold on tightly to the blade of purification in his bosom. He was headed for the tentacle that might contain the blood mystic's true body. In the blink of an eye, the sin of Hell's river surged into Thales' mind and made him shudder violently. Everything around him slowed down once more. Thales watched himself as he fluttered through the air, moving slowly towards the giant tentacle. Black Sword's words lingered by his ears. To ensure that nothing goes wrong, I hope that you can also do this: identify and seal the blood calamity using the sin of Hell's river and the blade of purification. I told you before that the sin of Hell's river is an omnipotent power of eradication. It can suddenly increase or strengthen your agility, reaction time, explosiveness, speed, strength, perception, sight, willpower, mental strength, contemplation, recovery time, endurance, any quality you can think of. Thales took in a deep breath. He felt the sin of Hell's river fluctuating under his skin and veins, wave after wave of it. That's right, it's this feeling. Just like the time he fell on Katerina in the birch tree forest, the sin of Hell's river kept strengthening his balance in the air. From afar, Thales watched in fear as Black Sword and Gleeward's figures were drowned within the tentacles and the dark monsters. This is also why the sin of Hell's river is often not easy to control. When you need to increase your agility, the sin of Hell's river will give you the agility of an acrobat, but it may also give you super speed, great strength, and perfect vision at the same time. This unconscious dispersion of power will greatly reduce its efficiency and persistency, reducing your control over it. Thus, as the wielder of the sin of Hell's river, your first lesson would be to summon. Summoning is different from the other powers of eradication. You need to consciously focus the sin of Hell's river on one part, then focus on what you want to do. Don't treat it as a tool. Instead, treat it as a companion whom you can speak with. Tell him, as a master of life, exactly what you want. Thales closed his eyes gently in midair and simply allowed the cold wind to blow past his ears. Very well, sin of Hell's river, the ability that came from being in a state between life and death. Right now, I'm faced with precisely the choice between life and death. What I need, is to seal the blood mystic. That's why, I need you to help me, sin of Hell's river. During that moment, Thales could clearly feel the sin of Hell's river which had originally spread through his entire body, but in a scattered manner. It was dissipating now. Those strange fluctuations gathered in his heart. After a moment, they surged to another place. Everyone's power of eradication is different. It depends entirely on you how strong you'll end up with the sin of Hell's river, and it'll entirely depend on how much you'll be able to figure out your ability. Trembler and instant death are the skills I mastered while I was figuring out my own ability. I'll give you some of my experiences and epiphanies regarding the sin of Hell's river. Perception. The perception I gained from the sin of Hell's river comes from vibrations and fluctuations. I call it feedback. Even the slightest breath can cause the air to shiver and it will travel to the ground, the wall, and so on, even cause a person's body to shiver. With feedback, I can sense the slightest movement 100 meters away. At the end, Thales sucked in a breath. He opened his gray eyes, already covered and filled entirely by the sin of Hell's river, in a manner that had happened to him before. At the instant the sin of Hell's river surged into his eyes, the effect of slowed time seemed to have suddenly disappeared. His once nimble hands and feet seemed to have become much slower in a very abrupt manner. Thales landed harshly on top of the tentacles and everything that touched his body felt slippery. Smaller tentacles instantly burst out of the tentacle to tie Thales' feet together tightly. Forcing down the feeling of nausea, Thales clenched his teeth tightly and repeated his mission in his heart multiple times. Little rascal's tears appeared before his eyes, along with countless corpses littered on the streets in Shield District. When he thought about this, Thales could not help but clench his teeth. With a shout, he gathered his mind together. Ah! But at that moment, he noticed something odd. Thales lifted his head and he could tell that the scene before his eyes had already become different. Thales was stunned. Compared to Black Sword, what Thales sensed was different from Black Sword's feedback, which allowed him to sense vibrations and fluctuations. His was in a different manner. It was sight. His vision became clear again. It was different to the clear colors he saw when those fluctuations had previously surged into his eyes, because at that time, the details were vague. This time, the feedback from the sin of Hell's river showed him another world. It was colorful and radiant, but the details were full of life. It was as if the resolution had become much higher. He could see every inch of the flesh and blood in that gigantic tentacle before him. Each vibration could be seen clearly. Thales could even guess the general flow of blood in the tentacle, as well as the detailed way the muscles contracted and expanded, and which inch of the tendon he would need to cut to be able to free himself. He stared at the world he could see, the world provided by his new senses, and almost had his eyes bulge out by how wide he had opened them. But that was not all. Thales stared at the tentacle shining in endless red light and he suddenly realized that there were multiple layers in that light. They were also in differing shades of red. As he became certain of his target, more of the sin of Hell's river gathered in his eyes, and it also became denser. Soon, he saw a shade of red so great that it had turned violet at the deepest parts of the tentacle. It slowly shrank and pulsated. So, that is. Thales' heart froze. The tentacles beneath his feet wrapped themselves tighter around him. He did not hesitate any longer. Thales raised the blade of purification and sensed the heat coming from the sword again. Then, he thrust it downwards. The tip of the sword sank into the tentacle. Right before Thales' eyes, the lights with similar shades of red at the tip of the sword and the tentacle fused together. Then, the red light coming from the latter disintegrated. From the spot where the sword had pierced into, the flesh and blood formed by parts of torn limbs from other living creatures swiftly melted and evaporated before it was reduced to ash. Thales only felt the grip around his feet loosen. As the tentacle was reduced to ash, he sank into the gigantic tentacle. In his panic, Thales swung the blade of purification in his hands wildly, and wherever it went, ashes would scatter all over the place. The inner part of the tentacle was like a red, mountain cave, and it looked as if it was moaning in pain. As it shuddered endlessly, it flung Thales around until he felt dizzy. Eventually, Thales' feet landed on the ground. The second prince panted harshly, sucking in air that was foul and rancid. Damn it, this place is just a little too disgusting. He lifted the blade of purification, stepped on a sticky but slippery mass of flesh and blood, then forced himself not to look at the torn limbs and broken bodies around him which were still moving slightly and looked as if they were breathing on their own. Heads, arms, stomachs, lungs, eyes, noses, and all other parts of a human body. He forced down the desire to vomit, then moved slowly towards the brightest red spot. Swoosh. Several thin tentacles and sharp thorns surged towards him. However, Thales only held on to the sword in his hand and cut them all without any hesitation, reducing them all to ash. He was getting closer to the glowing spot. Soon, Thales' target appeared in front of him. A purplish-red, naked girl whose limbs and back were mounted on a wall made of flesh and blood. The maiden's face was matted with layers of densely packed blood-red spots. They continuously squirmed about and looked very bizarre. She had no gentle expression on her face, neither did she have a charming smile. She only had her eyes closed and she breathed slowly. That bizarre, purplish-red shade could also be observed on the rest of her body. Millions of dark red blood vessels, thick and thin, stretched out from the wall of flesh and blood to connect with the maiden's body. Liquid could be seen vaguely flowing continuously inside them. The dumbfounded Thales could not help but stop moving. The prince stared at Giza, who had nearly fused together with the wall of flesh and blood behind her, and his breathing slowly quickened. What in the bloody heavens was this? The maiden widened her eyes and Thales, who was already anxious and terrified, jumped in fright. You should not be here, Giza, true form said slowly. The marks on her face quivered slightly, like parasites that swam about her. How did you find me? Thales first looked dazedly at the blood mystic in this form, especially at the numerous blood vessels on her body. When he remembered that those were the people who were dragged into her tentacle, and were now flowing about in those blood vessels as pieces of flesh or liquid, Thales felt another wave of nausea hit him. A second later, Thales sucked in a breath. Under Giza's cold and crazed eyes, he slowly walked closer to her and said resentfully, "Well, I can only say that you ran into a powerful warrior." Thales sucked in a breath, and his gaze became determined. I'll remember him, Black Sword, a terrifying opponent. Giza slowly narrowed her eyes. I should have noticed it a long time ago when he disappeared from my senses again. There is no way an opponent like him will repeat the same trick twice so easily. Thales cut apart two tentacles that tried to stop him. Mustering his bravery and ignoring the disgusting limbs around him, he stood before Giza. And you, child, you will regret it. Giza stared at the red sword and a deep wave of wariness appeared in her eyes. Do you know what it means to become a mystic, to obtain power, to be immortal? Do you know everything about it? No. It's not as good as you think it is. This isn't a gift. They are shackles. During that moment, a deep wave of loneliness appeared in Giza's eyes. A curse. Giza put on a complicated and profound expression. There was an emotion that had never appeared before in her words. And I only wanted to set you free. Thales frowned. He simply could not understand what she meant. Giza continued slowly, or else, when you find your name of origin, you will never ever be free. Thales shook his head so that his mind could be clearer. The blade of purification in his hand was hot, reminding him of his current situation. Very well. Thales ignored her words. He stared at Giza, lifted the blade of purification, and aimed it at Giza's abdomen before he spat his words. Then I will free you first. Giza only used a gaze filled with grief mixed with pity to look at him gently, as if she was staring at an ignorant child. It caused Thales' emotions to turn chaotic. No, Thales gulped. Remember Dragon Cloud City and Little Rascal. I have to end this. In the next moment, Thales clenched his teeth, emptied his mind, and thrust the red smallsword in his hand outwards. But his sword suddenly stopped halfway. Thales discovered to his shock that a person had stopped in front of Giza. Little rascal, he cried out. A shivering little rascal opened her eyes, spread her arms wide, and used her throat to block the blade of purification. Thales, little rascal had practically cried to the point that her eyes had become swollen. She stared ahead with unfocused eyes. Is it you? You? Thales only hesitated for a moment, because little rascal had suddenly pounced on Thales in the next moment. Thales watched as tears trailed down little rascal's small face, and he could not help but have his hand shiver. He wanted to move past her and stab Giza, but he had lost his chance. Thales only felt a furious tremor beneath his feet. This is... Immediately afterwards, tremors surged unendingly towards him, under his feet. At the moment, terror assaulted his head. He was then pushed down by little rascal because he could no longer keep his feet firmly on the ground. The two of them fell on the ground, formed by flesh and blood. No. Amid the chaos, little rascal lay on his body, and while trembling, she struck away the blade of purification in Thales' hand. Thales turned pale with fright. No. Slap. Thales felt a chill creep down his heart. The red smallsword in his hand had left his palm. It landed in a flesh and blood corner, stirring up countless ashes in its wake. Soon after, the blade of purification, now away from his hand, gradually darkened. It was no longer effective. During that second, Thales' mind was blank. Purification, blade of purification. As Giza laughed madly, the blood and flesh in the tentacle squirmed around and swallowed the useless blade of purification. It disappeared without a trace. This is a skill I learned from Black Sword. The blood mystic on the wall had the smile on her face become enchanting and coquettish again, executing an extremely high frequency of tremors on a surface area, as large as you can manage. If you can't even stand properly, then how are you going to seal me? How does that feel? Thales' face was pale. He pushed little rascal, who had now regained her mobility, a little away from him. He fixed his stare at the direction where he lost the blade of purification. But the only thing in sight was a red light formed by flesh and blood, nothing else. Legendary anti-mystic weapon, his only hope in fighting against a mystic. He lost it just like that. No, no. He no longer had a chance. Thales felt utterly devastated. He turned his head around in a daze and stared at Giza. I failed. Little rascal hugged him from the side and continued crying. Giza slowly sucked in a breath and narrowed her eyes slightly. Two tentacles stretched out from the inner layer of the flesh and blood wall. As little rascal cried out in surprise, they bound Thales' arms and legs and pulled him up. Thales struggled constantly, but like an insect trapped in a spider's web, it was futile. More tentacles stretched out from the inner layer. When little rascal covered her mouth to suppress her cries, the tips slowly sharpened and hardened. They became ferocious, sharp, deadly spikes. Let me offer you a warning. Giza stared at Thales, who was now brought before her. His face was ashen and heart was filled with despair. She put on a charming smile and spoke with a breath as fragrant as orchids. Throw away all those unnecessary emotions in battle. You saw it as well, did you not? You were dragged down by this thing really badly. Thales shuddered as he stared blankly at the blood mystic. This time, there was no Sonia, no Asda, or Black Sword. He was the only one who could save himself. It's just as I promised. During that moment, a kindly and sympathetic expression appeared on Giza's face. You will not suffer any pain, child. Thales gulped slowly. He only sensed the tentacles binding his limbs, wrapping themselves tighter around him. Even the sharp, spiked tentacles had slowly moved in front of him, and one of them even extended its sharp spike to pause just a few inches away from his left eyeball. The fear of death instantly welled up his heart. Thales could even hear his heart pounding fiercely. He sensed his blood rushing as his blood vessels swelled up. All his muscles trembled involuntarily, and the heat caused by the excitement slowly spread from his chest to his entire body. Is this the end? No, I have to save myself. I must. Giza smiled softly. The terrified Thales stared at the smiling mystic and said with much difficulty and pain. But this time, he only managed to say one word. In the next moment, several tentacles with sharp spikes were sent deep into Thales' body at the same time. Thales shuddered. No. His eyes became unfocused, and he stared at the blood mystic in disbelief. No. The first spike stabbed his left eye and went through his brain. No. The second spike pierced his throat, then went out the back of his neck. No. The third spike pierced into his heart, and went out the upper part of his back. No. More spikes pierced into Thales' body without mercy, without hesitation, and without reservation. But he could no longer feel it. During that second, all senses seemed to have left Thales' Jadastar. He felt as if he had sunk into eternal silence and darkness. Unable to return. Chapter 180. Knocking on the door. Thales opened his eyes slowly. Where was he? This was not important. What he felt was more important. His thoughts seemed to have undergone some changes, as though they had become scattered and they sounded like a stream, but muffled, as if a veil had been thrown over them. It was as though he did not care about anything. Why is it like this? Thales vaguely knew what was happening to him, but he did not want to get rid of the feeling. Isn't this good? It's as though I've entered another realm. Thales looked up. There were a lot of gray spheres. Yes, Thales saw a gray pebble. No, not just one. It was a gray pebble among countless others. Amazing. These pebbles are so far away from one another. No matter how much time they spend, they will never be able to get even 1 millimeter closer to each other. But they're so close at the same time. They're closer to one another compared to most things in the world, almost becoming one. Will they stay like this for thousands, millions, or even billions of years to come? So near, yet so far. Isn't the world so magical, that there can be such an interesting and lively relationship between two stationary stones? How about other things in the world? Is there also such an interesting relationship between them? There definitely is. Why didn't I notice all this before? Why didn't I realize how marvelous the world is? Perhaps I was too stupid. Thales thought calmly. He raised his gaze slowly. The pebbles moved further and further away from him, or perhaps nearer and nearer towards him. Still, this was unimportant. The important thing was that the distance between him and these pebbles was changing. Every single moment this change in distance happened, the pebbles also became something else. It went both ways, the position of the pebbles relative to him, and his position relative to the pebbles. He continued to lift his gaze. Ah, I see, Thales realized suddenly. These pebbles make up the surface of a floor tile. A coarse and uneven surface. Such an amazing combination. Even though they are only pebbles, they became another thing because of their position and the special distance between them. Something called the surface of a floor tile. Just like human beings, without their positions and the distance between them, every single person is an independent entity. However, when their positions or the distance between them change, and when they stand together, in the same dimension, area and society, they also become another thing. Something called crowds. Wait, a little voice in Thales' consciousness told him. This can perhaps be reversed. Their positions and the distance between them are determined because of their individual existences. Why do I know all this? Forget about it, it isn't important. The point is that, this is so interesting. I shall continue looking. Thales saw it. This grayish-black floor tile is octagonal, and is connected to several other floor tiles that have the same shape. They were put together by humans, weren't they? This is why the distance between them is so inconsistent. Or perhaps, the person who laid these tiles think that they were placed very uniformly, because human beings can't perceive the beauty of symmetry and uniformity. Or maybe, this is what they perceive as uniform. After all, from a distance away, the floor formed by these tiles would look very even. Thales looked up. He knew that it was daytime, because this phenomenon known as daytime was defined based on the position of the sun relative to the ground. It was the afternoon sun, the sunrays forming perfect right angles with the ground. There was a magnificent, exotic and foreign-looking house in front of Thales, with strange eaves that curled up at all four corners, a front door made of thick agarwood, and windows made of both glazed glass and crystal drops. There were also people with black hair and black eyes, in long flowing robes, and went in and out of the house. All of them looked anxious. Why are they anxious? Something crossed Thales' mind and he knew why. There was a black-haired, black-eyed young woman in the house. Screaming painfully in a pool of blood, she was surrounded by a group of women. Her lower abdomen bulged greatly, she was in labor. They did not have to worry. Thales saw that the living being inside the woman's belly was strong and energetic, moving its limbs continuously. She will give birth smoothly. On the other hand, someone who looked like the woman's husband, a well-dressed and respectable-looking man, was kept outside the house by a group of men. He looked like he was going through a hard time. I see, Thales thought, the inside and the outside of the house are cut off from each other. This is why the one inside is anxious and serious, while the one outside is suffering and in pain. If only they could see each other's situation. Or even, see that baby girl inside the woman's belly, perhaps then, they wouldn't need to be anxious, worried, terrified, and tormented anymore. Soon, the woman stopped her pained wailing. The trembling of her body slowly subsided. Following a faint cry, a baby girl covered in blood emerged. Hearing the news, the man outside the house broke through all the barriers and charged inside. Trembling, the man knelt in front of the bed. Holding his wife's hand, he nervously comforted her in a language Thales could not understand. The woman wore a smile. Finally, someone respectfully passed the baby girl to the man. The baby's eyes were closed tightly. Trembling, the man held his daughter. My God! Watching everything from the side, Thales glanced at the excited, black-haired and black-eyed man. He then glanced at the black-haired and black-eyed woman who had a relieved expression. He felt like laughing. What would they do if they knew the truth? The baby girl opened her eyes slowly and looked at the first person in her life. Seeing the baby girl clearly, the man trembled. He raised his head in shock and looked at everyone around him with panic. Speaking in a language Thales could not understand, the man seemed to be at a loss for what to do. Someone walked forward with a frown. Taking a look at the baby girl, the person immediately froze. An uproar arose in the house. At that, the woman's frightened screams, the baby's wails, the servant's anxious reassurances and the man's growls, echoed one after another. Ha ha ha, watching all this, Thales burst out laughing. He looked at the baby girl's sparkling, crystal clear blue eyes, totally different from her father and mother's black ones. It probably never crossed the man's mind that his wife's daughter might not be his daughter. Hilarious. Thales stopped watching, he began churning out thoughts like a machine. If the man could see a few months ago that his daughter had blue eyes that were not inherited from him. No, not just that. The baby girl's skin is obviously quite fair, her hair is curly, and her nose bridge is a little tall. All these could be seen quite obviously even before her birth. Unfortunately, the man didn't know. If he knew, would he still have to experience this disappointment, pain and fury, after all that anticipation, worry, and waiting? No. He wouldn't have to, but the man can't see through his wife's belly, and so, could not see her betrayal. This is why he is fated to go through all this. His vision is too narrow, and his knowledge too limited. This is the price paid for stupidity and ignorance. Such a pity, but oh, so laughable. Thales was bored of all this. He turned his head. This is not quite right. He was anticipating to see the house's interior. However, what did he see instead? The morning sun, and black with hints of white. No. Black was the color of the water. The white parts were the foam and the light reflections on the water's surface. He was looking at an ocean under the morning sun. An endless sea. Endless, no, it's too narrow. This ocean, from one end to another, this ocean is too small. There was a small island on one side of the ocean, and a long and narrow beach on the other. The ocean was also quite vast, almost borderless. It was especially so from the point of view of this long and narrow sailing ship, which sailed on the sea like a tiny boat. Thales stared quietly at the flag on the ship. There was an image of a white seagull holding an anchor with its beak. Interesting, the seagull and anchor, the sky and the bottom of the sea. It's like there's a far and unreachable distance between them, but at the same time, they are so close to each other. The sailors on the ship were performing their duties conscientiously. A beardless young man, who was neatly dressed and had a polite bearing, stood beside the rudder. He looked out of place among the rough-looking sailors who were drenched in sweat and dirt. As he spoke with the impatient-looking helmsman, he stared excitedly at the water beyond. This time, Thales could understand what the man said. Trust me, the misfortunes before this were only a test from Errol. We have already passed through the black whirlpool. According to the nautical chart passed down from my ancestors, we will soon be able to find. However, the man spoke the common tongue in a somewhat unusual accent. The rise and fall of his tone and cadence was especially obvious. It was different from the boorish, murmured, short and powerful Northland accent, neither was it like the clear and precise Constellation accent. The young man seems to be a person of status. Is he the captain, or the one who hired this ship? Thales smiled again. It's a pity that, the moment he turns his head, he would see the contempt and disdain in the sailor's eyes. Why would boss believe in what this young lad says? I heard that he's not a noble, but a gangster from Valier gang. One of the sailors said in a low voice to an old sailor, who was coiling a rope. Boss even listened to him and took the risk of sailing to such a place. The old sailor glared fiercely at the young man. Of course he is a gangster. However, his ancestor from a few generations ago was elected for the 36th seat in parliament. That ancestor owed boss a huge sum of money. For some reason, instead of punishing him, boss immediately left Crystal Jade City and sailed to this accursed place. He doesn't even want to go to Evergreen Island, which had been set as part of the voyage. The first sailor furrowed his brow. The eye of the Sea of Eradication, is this really such an unlucky place? Everyone looks so uncomfortable. Of course, think about it. The old sailor spat, his expression was unpleasant. The final empire is entombed at the bottom of the sea beneath our feet. God knows how deep it is. Millions of empire citizens rotting into skeletons from the sea water, and torn to pieces by the fish. Legend has it that their lost souls have not been able to rest in peace through these 600 years, and are filled with hatred and pain. Something strange happens here every year. Something really, really strange. The young man could not see what was going on behind his back. Even when he turned his head around, the sailors hid their emotions and did their jobs with their heads bowed. So, he would never know his true standing on the ship. Why is he so stupid? Doesn't he know that the heart of the helmsman beside him is beating faster? His blood flow is also speeding up and he's getting more and more agitated. Why is he still rattling away? He isn't aware of how almost everyone on the ship contract their pupils when they see him, exuding hatred and disgust. He doesn't know that one of the logs underneath the ship can no longer bear any more weight and might be thrown off by a huge wave at any moment. Doesn't he know? Of course, Thales continued laughing. Neither can anyone on the ship see that within the mist a few thousand meters away, a hideous battleship with a blood-colored parrot on its flag is sailing head-on towards them. In the clamor, ecstasy, wine, and blood, the fierce pirates opened their stinky breaths and counted their spoils from a few days ago. They also dallied with the captives, especially the female ones. The leader of the pirates even announced excitedly that they would return to the harbor after robbing one more ship. Polished blades and swords, crossbows, bows and arrows lay waiting in the pirates' arsenal. That young man and the ship he's on, why are they so foolish? Why are they still sailing onward? Such a simple and obvious matter, why do they not know? Even though they live in such a magical world, they have no clue at all about the things happening around them. Such a waste, how uninteresting. Thales felt uncontrollably irritated. He turned his head back around again. He saw a grain of sand under the moonlight. Sand, a marvelous creation. Countless objects of the same kind piled together, forming an entire desert through their intriguing and uniform, relative position. Just like this, innumerable grains of sand grate, squeeze and flatten themselves against each other, they reject and pull apart from one another. Watching every single grain of sand in the desert, Thales marveled internally. They form an equally wonderful desert. He turned his head again. And saw a leaf in the dark. But he already had experience with this kind of problem. It isn't just a leaf, but a forest. A dark forest under the night sky. Pairs of glimmering eyes could be seen within the forest indistinctly. They were countless animals that were either predator or prey. And yet, they are so pitiful. Thales sneered softly in his heart. A badger happily dug at an ant nest beside the wet soil. There was a huge beetle in the colony, and this delighted the hungry badger. Unfortunately, it had no idea that a few hundred meters away, one of its mating partners had fallen prey to a lone wolf. On the other hand, the old lone wolf that caught the badger was celebrating its hunt. It did not know that another wolf that used to be of the same pack was hunted and killed by a panther that pounced from the top of a tree. Neither did the panther know that a pup it gave birth to 6 years ago was dying under the hoof of a furious, giant rhinoceros. The giant rhinoceros did not know that a group of fully equipped humans were excitedly peeling off the skin, retaining the bones, and taking out the meat of one of its relatives. They were doing this upstream. And neither did these humans know that countless pairs of glimmering purple eyes were staring coldly at them from within the dense wood behind them. Those creatures silently launched their arrows in the darkness. These creatures with the purple eyes and pointy ears might have never thought that one of their kind at a lookout post in the forest several meters away from this place was frightened, confronting another fair-skinned, pointy-eared creature while using a machete and rapier respectively. At the final moment, the fair-skinned, pointy-eared creature delivered a stab through its opponent's chest. The pale, pointy-eared victor spat viciously and left in disdain, leaving the wide-eyed corpse to rot slowly and become the food to a colony of ants beside him. These ants only migrated here a few days ago. Flustered, they were the losers of another battle. Another strong colony of ants chased them out. However, they would be happy to know that the old enemies that chased them out of their habitat had been totally annihilated by a mischievous badger. This happened after the ants brought back an old beetle's corpse. Thales watched quietly as this completed food chain dictated everything that happened here. Don't these creatures know about all this? It's so interesting yet so sad. At this, Thales suddenly felt a strange warmth wash over him, from his entire body. Wait, body. Thales suddenly noticed a problem. Where was his body? Then, a wonderful sensation was transmitted to every single sensory organ in him. Several scenes appeared before his eyes at the same time in a sequence like a flowing stream of water, eaves of unique styles, sailing ships on the sea, silent deserts under the moonlight. A forest full of life. Thales watched all this with utmost concentration. Interesting, fun, marvelous. More and more scenes appeared before his eyes. A glacier in a snowstorm, a castle on a sea cliff, a warm, wet land, a prairie under the setting sun, a vast plain in the evening, a fortress at night, the surface of an ocean that reflects the moonlight. Soon, Thales felt the world before his eyes become clearer, stranger. He also became more excited, more content. Everything in the world was in front of his eyes, he could see and hear everything clearly. No, not just this. He knew everything. It was as if he stood at the places where everything was happening. He was present in everything. He was everything. Thales became happier and happier. He enjoyed this sensation very much. He wanted more. More. To see more, know more and obtain more. More. The scenes flashing before his eyes came faster and faster, becoming more intense, getting shorter and shorter. The next moment. Boom, asterisk. It was as if an explosive thunder rang beside his ears. Thales' vision darkened momentarily. There were no changing scenes anymore. Instead, everything was fixed eternally before his eyes. It was as if he was watching thousands of movies at the same time, and the movies showcased everything in the world, as though he was standing in every corner of the world at the same time. No, not just that. Thales suddenly felt like all his sensory organs were being compressed hard. The next second, Thales felt an intense vibration. A dreary sound echoed vacantly within his consciousness. It was as if his consciousness had suddenly hit something. Bang, asterisk. This sound, it was as if someone was knocking on a door. Bang, asterisk. His consciousness shook again. Bang, asterisk. The sound echoed for a third time. Thales trembled a little. After some time, Thales suddenly felt everything that existed around him move. At that moment, it was as if a door was opened. He entered a new world. In this new world, his sensory organs could feel everything with incomparable clarity. From the slightest granule in the deepest parts underground, to the endless ocean in the vast sky. Not only could he see everything in the world, but it was as though he was the world simultaneously. But an accident also happened at the same time. He became increasingly conscious of a wave of prickling sensations that irritated his skin. Thales trembled slightly and felt bewildered. What's going on? It was as if his consciousness suddenly ascended into a dark and quiet space. Almost at the same moment he entered this space, Thales felt something strange, as though it was instinctive. Yes. It felt like there were people snooping on him. He did not know how he felt it, but his instinct told him that behind the darkness of this space, there were numerous pairs of eyes staring at him strangely. Thales subconsciously raised his gaze, trying to see through the darkness. The moment he thought of seeing through the darkness, without warning, he felt the nearest being to him. It was a ball of light. A colorless ball of light. Bang! Asterisk. Another violent knock. The colorless ball of light that suddenly appeared in the darkness seemed foggy and blurred, as though it could not be touched. Before Thales could react, the ball of light moved slightly. Lifeless words then rang beside Thales' ears. Rude. Thales' field of vision shook. What? This ball of light is conscious. The colorless ball of light asked. His tone was still insipid. I have not seen you before. What is your name of origin? Name of origin, mystics, mystic energy, the first declaration among mystics. Thales recalled a few familiar terms from his memory, which felt as though it was separated from him by a veil. He immediately shuddered violently, but before he could dwell on things, the ball of light suddenly went further and further away from his vision. Hey! The insipid voice became increasingly faint, as though it was shouting from a distance. Who are you? Thales paid no heed to it. He felt as though his consciousness was fading away. Bang! Asterisk. Thales felt his field of vision shake again. He came across a pile of metallic gray, sparkling debris. Different from the ball of light just now, this pile of debris seemed to be lifeless and without consciousness. However, just when Thales became confused of his surroundings, a brown mist appeared in front of him. This mist gave him the same feeling as the metallic gray debris. It seemed to be lifeless, and could not speak. Just when a thought came to Thales, the pile of debris and the mist moved slowly away. Bang! Asterisk. There was another knock. Thales was starting to get used to it. Soon, a green ray of light appeared before his eyes. But this ray of light had consciousness. The green light kept changing shape, from round and square, to cylindrical and rectangular. Oh my, a gentle but rude voice came from the green light. Just like its owner, the voice fluttered about. Which idiot is this? Are you retarded? Why are you knocking on the door? The boss, Fruland, the little idiot, Asda, the old ghost, Zarkal, the fierce Kire, the adorable top student, L, or are you the flat-chested Giza? These names are kind of familiar. A few questions appeared in Thales' mind. This is, where am I, what am I doing, why can't I remember anything? Hey, the voice that came from the green light continued to laugh. Don't tell me that you're Taurus, the legendary big guy. Thinking of these few questions, Thales' thoughts suddenly became chaotic. Amid the panic, the green light suddenly disappeared before his eyes. Hiya, why did you leave? Don't tell me that you're really Taurus. The green light's voice echoed from afar. Don't rush off, you are my idol, at least give me your signature first. There were two more knocks, and Thales encountered two strange but lifeless and soundless beings, a silver wall of light and a golden cube. Just when Thales was feeling bewildered and lost, a faint, purple light appeared before him. This purple light only glimmered slightly, but it seemed sharp. Thales could almost not look straight at it. Its reaction was also very simple. Go away, it seemed to be a bad-tempered being. Get lost, the fierce voice continued. The faint, purple light disappeared after that. Thales was slightly stupefied. A question appeared within his boundless consciousness. What's going on? The next moment. Bang! Asterisk. After another knock, Thales came before a glimmering, human-shaped outline. A human outline, it glimmered with a familiar blue light. Another. This feeling, it's like I'm flowing endlessly, but omnipresent at the same time. A familiar voice echoed slowly from the outline. Stop knocking on the door, Thales. A thought appeared in Thales' mind. It knows me, this familiar voice. All of us felt your presence. All of them, my presence, me. At that moment, it was as if a lot of memories suddenly returned to Thales' mind. A thought appeared in Thales' mind. Wait, you are, Thales stared at the ball of light puzzledly. An indistinct name appeared in his hazy mind. You are Asda. The blue light's outline sparkled a bit. Thales confirmed his own guess. I am trapped underground. I don't know what happened to you, and why you can knock straight on the door. Asda the air mystic's pleasant voice echoed from the blue light. He sounded calm and steady, without any extra emotions. But this is too dangerous. You must leave your basic form immediately. Thales was puzzled. What? However, Asda did not answer his question. The mystic anxiously said, listen up, they felt it, too. They will definitely come for you. Before you are completely sealed, escape now.